Beneath the crushing weight of the oceans, where sunlight never penetrates and pressure bends metal and bone alike, there exist creatures that defy comprehension. Along the dark chasms of the Mariana Trench, through the twisting canyons of the Somali Basin, and across the shadowed depths of the Azores and Philippine Trench, elusive forms glide and pulse, leaving only whispers of movement in their wake. Their shapes, behaviours and adaptations challenge our understanding of life itself, and the evidence of their existence comes not from clear sight, but from fleeting sonar blips, distorted images, and the fragmented accounts of those who have glimpsed them. In this journey into the hidden depths, we will explore these enigmas, trace the traces they leave, and uncover the mysteries of deep-sea life that science has yet to fully explain. The Ningen of the Southern Ocean. The waters of the Southern Ocean stretch into a realm where ordinary sense falters, a place defined by drifting ice fields and long silences that seem to deepen with every passing hour. Ships that enter these latitudes move through a world of muted colour, where distant bergs glow faintly under low light and the horizon dissolves into a pale, indistinct haze. It is here that scattered reports of the Ningen have taken root, mentioned quietly among crews who claim to have seen something move beneath the ice with an unsettling, slow grace. The region's harsh winds and shifting temperatures create illusions that even trained observers sometimes struggle to separate from reality, yet these accounts are too consistent and too calmly delivered to dismiss entirely as tricks of the cold. Maritime patrol logs from vessels operating near the Antarctic convergence describe nights when the sea falls strangely still. During one such patrol, crew members reported a pale mass rising alongside their hull, illuminated faintly by the vessel's deck lights. They first assumed it was an overturned slab of seasonal ice, yet the surface appeared smooth and unbroken, lacking the fractures common to drifting flows. The object glided against the current with deliberate steadiness, its shape subtly tapering before disappearing into the dark without sound or turbulence. Fishermen and researchers in these waters are accustomed to unexpected encounters with whales, squid, and drifting ice, but the crew later noted that the movement they saw did not align with the behaviour of any known animal. A research mission near the Ross Sea documented unusual thermal fluctuations along a sub-ice channel, where temperatures are usually stable due to constant mixing by dense Antarctic bottom water. These changes were accompanied by inconsistent sonar returns, as if a single large organism was passing in and out of the sound beams. The recorded outline showed none of the familiar density variations typical of deep-diving mammals, instead presenting an almost uniform structure from one end to the other. Scientists aboard the vessel hesitated before labelling the anomaly, but several privately acknowledged that the smooth, featureless silhouette resembled earlier descriptions of the Ningen. Occasional observations have also come from submersibles, exploring the upper reaches of Antarctica's continental slopes. One expedition reported seeing a broad, pale form drifting upward from a cloud of disturbed sediment, its boundaries difficult to define. The water at these depths filters almost all natural light, and visibility depends entirely on the submersible's lamps, yet the researchers insisted they saw a continuous surface rather than a patchwork of limbs or fins. The light reflected faintly off the creature's exterior, giving it an almost glacial appearance. No one on board could identify the organism, though several remarked on the silence that followed the sighting, as if the entire team sensed the gravity of what had passed beneath them. Historical accounts from the mid-20th century, found in logbooks of long-distance whaling vessels, also mention pale shapes rising through the mist during winter nights. Most descriptions are restrained, limited to vague phrases such as white mass at surface or smooth body moving against swell. Sailors who spent months in Antarctic waters were familiar with deceptive reflections and the hazards of broken ice, yet these entries describe motion that resisted categorization. The shapes appeared to maintain position against strong currents, an ability requiring remarkable strength or buoyancy control. Though the language is subtle, the consistency between these older reports and recent observations adds an unexpected continuity to the narrative. Modern oceanographic studies of Antarctic ecosystems reveal several unusual environmental features that may contribute to the frequency of sightings. The Southern Ocean functions as one of Earth's largest carbon sinks, drawing cold, oxygen-rich water downward and creating deep layers with striking clarity during certain seasons. researchers operating remote cameras under ice shelves have occasionally captured fleeting glimpses of pale objects moving far below their equipment. Some propose that new species adapted to extreme cold may inhabit these isolated environments, yet none of the documented footage has yielded a recognizable anatomical structure. In scientific discussions, these fragments often lead back to the same question: whether the Ningen represents an undiscovered organism or a convergence of rare environmental conditions. Autonomous underwater vehicles used in these waters sometimes record abrupt signal interruptions, followed by momentary appearances of pale forms at the edge of their cameras. Engineers attribute some of these disruptions to interference from shifting ice layers, but others occur in open water miles away from the nearest shelf. The timing of the anomalies frequently aligns with changes in pressure gradients detected by nearby monitoring buoys, suggesting the presence of a large moving body capable of altering water density. Although the data remains inconclusive, the repeating pattern has become difficult to ignore. Expeditions seeking to investigate these events rarely return with more than scattered fragments of evidence. The combination of punishing weather, unpredictable ice cover, and vast distances makes extended observation nearly impossible. Even when vessels are equipped with advanced imaging systems, the creature, if it exists, appears only during brief intervals when visibility clears and the sea turns remarkably calm. In these moments, witnesses describe a presence that feels out of place in the modern catalogue of marine life, as if something from an older and quieter world briefly rises into view before withdrawing again into darkness. What lingers after each report is not certainty, but a growing impression that the Southern Ocean shelters a creature of great size and unusual stillness, a being glimpsed only when the Antarctic night softens and the water holds its breath. The Tasman Sea Phantom Stalker. Nightfall settles differently over the Tasman region, creating a band of shifting darkness that has long troubled crews who sense they are not alone in the open expanse. Mariners navigating the waters between Australia and New Zealand often report fleeting shadows gliding beneath their hulls, shapes that appear to anticipate every change in course. Over the decades, these reports coalesced around a name whispered by veteran sailors and research divers alike: the Phantom Stalker. Its presence is rarely confirmed by direct observation, but sonar echoes, disrupted currents, and the inexplicable dimming of lights aboard submersibles have made the term more than mere superstition. In these waters, where the currents are turbulent and the depths drop abruptly, the Phantom Stalker emerges as a creature of both science and apprehension. The first anomalies emerged when survey technicians noticed a curious blind spot sliding behind their sonar arrays with an unnatural steadiness. During mapping missions along the Norfolk Ridge, vessels repeatedly recorded acoustic voids that moved independently of the ship's speed or heading. These blind spots were unlike any sonar artifact typically caused by thermoclines, sediment, or schools of fish. Instead, they suggested a body of enormous mass trailing silently, its form invisible to the array but unmistakably present. While researchers initially attempted to attribute the phenomenon to instrumentation error, the consistency across multiple expeditions indicated an entity moving deliberately through the deep currents of the Tasman Sea. A remote vehicle descending along the Norfolk Ridge later captured the unnerving sight of a shadow that matched its every manoeuvre without revealing a single defining feature. The ROV's lights illuminated clouds of sediment disturbed as it passed, yet the shape behind it remained elusive, never materializing into a recognizable form. Even the most experienced crew members struggled to describe the movement. It was neither rapid nor chaotic, but deliberate, almost calculating. Some speculated that the Phantom Stalker could be a deep-sea predator yet undiscovered, a leviathan adapted to the Tasman's complex thermal layers and deep canyons. Its ability to track without being seen, however, defied any known model of marine behavior. Efforts to identify the presence have pushed biologists toward comparisons that unravel as quickly as they are proposed, each failing to match the creature's elusive behavior. A giant shark was suggested first, its size and agility theoretically capable of producing the sonar anomalies, but shark physiology cannot account for the precision with which the entity followed the equipment. Likewise, a large squid was hypothesized, yet cephalopods do not exhibit the disciplined pacing observed in the gliders and submersibles. researchers documented how the phantom stalker moved countercurrent at rates surpassing typical pelagic animals, maintaining an almost constant distance without revealing its bulk. The anomaly, once suspected to be a misreading, now appeared to challenge the limits of deep-sea biology itself. Data gathered from drifting gliders added another layer of uncertainty when their instruments recorded a massive body following them through consecutive navigation points. Pressure readings fluctuated subtly, suggesting displacement of thousands of tons of water, yet no form could be seen. These gliders, designed to detect density changes caused by currents, repeatedly captured traces consistent with a body moving at a controlled speed and depth. Scientists noted that the movement pattern resembled that of stalking predators in shallower ecosystems, yet magnified to a scale no known animal inhabits. The Tasman Sea, with its complex topography and deep basins, seemed to conceal a creature whose existence was implied only by the space it occupied and the disturbances it left behind. During a dive near the Dampier Ridge, a submersible's camera system briefly flickered, as if eclipsed by something that refused to leave even the faintest outline. The lights cast into the surrounding water were dimmed intermittently, a phenomenon difficult to attribute to particulate matter alone. Operators described an overwhelming sense of observation, a sensation that something large was maintaining a precise distance, neither approaching nor retreating, yet intimately aware of the submersible's movements. Thermocline gradients, sediment clouds, and current shifts offered no sufficient explanation. In that fleeting interval, the researchers felt the presence of something enormous and unseen, a being that existed beyond the realm of known marine life, yet within reach of human perception. Other expeditions corroborated similar experiences. Gliders, sonar, and submersibles all recorded anomalies concentrated along deep trenches and underwater ridges, where the East Australian current interacts with colder waters from the south. Each trace, though fragmentary, reinforced the pattern of deliberate trailing. The creature's ability to navigate and maintain formation across complex currents suggested advanced sensory adaptation, one capable of detecting submersibles, gliders, and vessels without being revealed. Scientific attempts to capture photographic or physical evidence have repeatedly failed, leaving only traces, echoes, and the faintest impressions of a predator that seems to exist solely at the edge of visibility. The Tasman Sea phantom stalker remains a mystery, defined by absence and movement rather than shape or colour. It is catalogued less by what it is and more by the disturbances it leaves. Blind spots in sonar, shadows at the periphery of light, subtle pressure shifts across vast depths. Even with decades of research and advanced instrumentation, the creature evades detection, hinting at a form of life perfectly adapted to the hidden corridors of the Tasman's deep waters. It follows, unseen and deliberate, through a world humans cannot inhabit, marking its presence only in the shadows it casts and the silence it leaves behind. The Mariana Trench, Black Leviathan. The descent begins in a void so dense that every metre feels heavier than the last, and even reinforced submersibles creak under the unrelenting pressure. Darkness thickens with each passing kilometre, a blackness unbroken by light or reflection, where the human eye struggles to orient itself. Pilots report an immediate sense of isolation, unlike any other oceanic expedition, a vertical prison of water so cold and unyielding that it feels alive. Within this crushing environment, whispers circulate among deep-sea operators of a presence far beyond ordinary scale, a creature named the Black Leviathan, whose sheer size dwarfs any known animal. It is not merely observed but intuited, a shadow cast in the mind as much as in the abyss, an entity defined by depth and the limitations of human perception. Sonar operators soon noticed fleeting blips that vanished as quickly as they appeared, enormous shapes that seemed to hover just beyond measurable range. These anomalies cannot be accounted for by drifting sediment, thermocline distortions, or even the immense amphipod swarms that populate Hadal zones. On multiple occasions, the echoes suggested a body hundreds of meters long, stretching along the trench floor before disappearing into darkness. The readings are inconsistent with any known whale or squid species, and yet they reappear with uncanny regularity along the same trench corridors, hinting at deliberate movement through one of the least accessible regions on Earth. Each anomaly is recorded, scrutinized, and then dismissed, only to re-emerge in subsequent expeditions with subtle variations that challenge interpretation. Logs from past Mariana Trench expeditions mention shadows stretching along the abyssal slopes, disturbances so immense they dwarfed the largest known trench fauna. Crews describe faint distortions in their lights, shapes that slide past the periphery of vision like ink spreading in water. Bathymetric charts reveal deep calderas and subduction ridges, and some of the disturbances appear to follow these natural contours as if navigating with intention. Occasionally, sediment clouds are disturbed in patterns inconsistent with any known animal behaviour, hinting at movement far larger than a giant squid or Hadal whale could produce. Despite decades of exploration, the sheer inaccessibility of the trench has rendered direct observation fleeting, leaving only tantalising fragments of evidence. Scientists have proposed explanations ranging from giant squid variants to unknown whale species, yet none account for the patterns of movement, depth and sheer scale observed. Giant squid, while formidable, cannot reach the trench's deepest zones or maintain consistent movement along ridges at extreme pressures. Likewise, whale physiology fails under the crushing conditions beyond 10,000 metres, and no documented adaptations allow for vertical travel of the magnitude suggested by the anomalies. Gelatinous megafauna, though common in deep pelagic zones, would be too fragile to produce the sonar signatures and pressure displacements recorded. Each hypothesis, while plausible in isolation, collapses when confronted with the Leviathan's combination of size, vertical range and persistence, leaving scientists with a growing sense of an unknown order beneath the abyss. Pilots and crew describe an unsettling impression of awareness, a presence that seems to watch silently from the unlit depths as their lights probe the darkness. Submersibles occasionally feel resistance in unexpected ways, currents that twist against their hulls without warning, as if a massive body has passed nearby. Thermal sensors sometimes spike in sudden, localized bursts, suggesting displacement of water too substantial to belong to anything previously recorded. Even the most technologically sophisticated equipment cannot fully capture the Leviathan. It exists in the interplay of light and shadow, pressure and displacement, sonar and perception. The sensation of being observed, of descending through a realm where human senses are inadequate, has become as integral to the Black Leviathan's presence as any technical reading. Even after repeated dives and advanced instrumentation, the Leviathan remains largely hypothetical, defined more by what it displaces and disturbs than by what can be seen. Bathymetric scans reveal trench slopes scarred by currents or sediment shifts inconsistent with natural erosion alone. Acoustic sensors detect faint, irregular pulses in the Hadal darkness that do not match known cetacean or cephalopod patterns. Hydrothermal vents emit clouds that occasionally obscure these anomalies, adding to the difficulty of observation. Every glimpse, every anomaly reinforces the same conclusion. Something vast moves through the Mariana Trench, a creature whose existence defies conventional biology, yet whose traces are undeniable to those who venture far enough into the abyss. The Black Leviathan is not a creature of pursuit or aggression, nor does it reveal itself on command. It is a force of scale and absence, a presence that defines the very extremes of the planet's oceans. It reminds researchers that some regions of Earth remain unknowable, that some life forms may never be observed directly, and that the abyss is not merely dark but alive with the possibility of the impossible. In the unlit chasms of the Mariana Trench, something moves that no eye can follow and no instrument can fully comprehend. The Norwegian Abyss, Glow Serpent. Strands of eerie luminescence twist along the edges of Norway's deep fjords, drifting like liquid ribbons through the darkness of the abyss. The phenomenon is at once mesmerizing and disquieting, casting a soft glow on the jagged walls of submerged canyons and revealing glimpses of terrain that sunlight never touches. Researchers and sailors have named the source the Glow Serpent, a creature whose form appears serpentine and elongated, weaving through the depths with movements that suggest both grace and intelligence. Observers note that its light pulses are irregular yet rhythmic, fading and brightening as though communicating, or deliberately concealing itself. Even in the sparse instrumentation of submersibles, the glowing streaks hint at a lifeform far beyond the ordinary, a presence that seems to embrace the dark while illuminating only the faintest outline of its body. Submersibles and ROVs recorded fleeting, sinuous shapes that glimmered briefly before dissolving into the surrounding bioluminescent haze, Sonar often fails to capture these forms, leaving visual observation as the primary evidence of their existence. The glowing shapes sometimes appear in corridors between underwater cliffs, following the contours of the fjords and continental slopes as though guided by an unseen knowledge of the terrain. Depths range from several hundred to thousands of meters, where cold currents funnel nutrients and create pockets of life invisible to the surface world. Operators describe moments when lights on their craft seem swallowed by shadows, only for the faint glimmer of the glow serpent to re-emerge beyond reach, teasing both distance and scale with every undulation. Funneling into the fjords, currents carry dense concentrations of plankton and tiny crustaceans, forming nutrient-rich pockets that shimmer under submersible lights. The glow serpent weaves through these illuminated areas with uncanny precision, as if tracing invisible pathways. Its glowing streaks often coincide with plankton aggregations, amplifying the effect into an almost orchestrated display. Marine biologists suggest the creature may exploit these concentrations for hunting, feeding on lanternfish or amphipods while remaining partially concealed. Fjord walls covered in cold-water coral, sponges and sessile invertebrates reflect its light in subtle patterns, complicating attempts to measure its size and shape. The interaction of currents, light and marine life gives the glow serpent an ethereal camouflage uniquely suited to Norway's deep fjords. Researchers noted patterns of light that seem deliberate, glowing pulses that no known deep-sea species could produce in such coordinated arcs. While bioluminescence is common among deep-sea organisms, lanternfish, dragonfish and siphonophores create dazzling displays for predation or communication. The glow serpent's motions suggest a more complex behaviour. Pulses travel along its length, splitting and merging in ways that hint at control beyond instinct alone. Occasionally the creature appears to pause, its light holding steady for long stretches, before surging forward along fjord ridges or around underwater cliffs. These repeated movements suggest familiarity with the environment and a capacity to navigate intricate topography with precision unknown in other large marine species. Scientists proposed explanations ranging from enormous eels to previously undocumented cephalopods, yet each hypothesis faltered when measured against the creature's luminescent movements. Giant eels, while capable of long, flexible forms, do not produce synchronized light patterns along their bodies. Cephalopods are luminescent only in limited areas and rarely exceed modest sizes, while the glow serpent's streaks extend hundreds of meters in a continuous display. Some theorists suggest the possibility of multiple organisms moving in concert, though this fails to account for the singular twisting pulses that appear to animate a cohesive body. Each explanation highlights how environmental knowledge, fjord currents, oxygen minimum zones, and nutrient-rich deep channels cannot fully account for the creature's uncanny behaviour. Sightings recurred along underwater valleys and canyon-like ridges, the glow serpent appearing to glide with awareness through its terrain. Submersible logs often mention sudden retreats or accelerations, as if the creature senses approaching craft and adjusts its course with calculated precision. Unlike other bioluminescent animals, which rely on light for camouflage or prey attraction, the glow serpent seems to use illumination as both a presence and a mystery, highlighting portions of the abyss while leaving most of its form hidden. Researchers speculate that these patterns could represent evolutionary adaptation to fjord environments, allowing the creature to communicate or hunt in near-total darkness while avoiding detection from larger predators, or human observers. Operators and scientists alike describe an almost hypnotic effect as the glowing form moves just beyond reach, leaving only fleeting impressions of its full shape and length. The waves of light reflect off fjord walls and sediment clouds, creating illusions of multiple forms or stretching its apparent size. Pilots recount moments of vertigo, a disorienting sensation in which the creature seems to extend indefinitely, vanishing only to reappear in another canyon or trench. Even with advanced imaging equipment, the creature's full morphology remains elusive, hinting at adaptations perfectly suited to evade both visual and electronic detection. The glow serpent exists at the intersection of biological possibility and visual spectacle, a creature defined as much by what is revealed as by what remains unseen. The glow serpent moves through the Norwegian abyss with a grace that science cannot yet explain, a luminous enigma twisting between cliffs, ridges, and the hidden valleys of the deep. Its light, fleeting and hypnotic, is a reminder that the oceans still conceal forms of life that challenge understanding, existing just beyond human perception and yet leaving undeniable traces of motion, presence, and intelligence. In the cold, dark fjords of Norway, something alive twists and glows where no eye can capture it fully. The Pacific worm colony Colossus. Massive, intertwined forms pulse in slow, undulating waves, their sheer size suggested only by the shadows they cast on the abyssal floor. Scientists and submersible pilots have named it the Pacific worm colony Colossus, a life form that defies conventional classification by existing as a vast network of modular organisms moving in unison. Individual segments twist and extend across hundreds of meters, forming patterns that suggest both purpose and an almost hypnotic coordination. The colony feeds in darkness, relying on chemosynthetic bacteria to convert vent emissions into energy, yet it behaves as a single entity, an immense organism composed of countless smaller parts. Observers describe a sense of alien intelligence, not in the form of predation, but in the deliberate rhythmic expansions and contractions that ripple along the seabed. Observers noticed that individual segments move in precise coordination, as if each part of the colony senses the others across vast distances. Submersibles capturing video footage report faint, synchronized pulses traveling along the intertwined bodies, sometimes splitting and recombining in ways that seem almost impossible. These motions are slow but purposeful, creating temporary structures and arches that rise from the seabed and fold back again, patterns unlike any other benthic life known. Pressure, near-freezing temperatures, and near-total darkness make human observation difficult, and yet every recorded movement reinforces the notion that the colony behaves cohesively, a superorganism navigating the abyssal plane as one. Chemosynthetic bacteria coat the organism's segments, allowing it to extract energy from vent emissions, while the colony maintains cohesion over hundreds of meters. These bacteria convert sulfur-rich fluids from hydrothermal vents into nutrients, supporting the colony's vast biomass, without reliance on sunlight or conventional prey. Observers note that its path often coincides with vent systems and nutrient flows, as if the organism understands where sustenance is concentrated. Small fish and crustaceans sometimes congregate near the colony, either drawn to the warmth of vent plumes or moving alongside it, a testament to the organism's quiet but tangible impact on its ecosystem. Even the microbial composition hints at adaptation unique to this modular organism, a network perfectly aligned with the harsh, resource-limited abyss. Attempts to classify the phenomenon falter against its collective behavior, a network of life that reacts like a single intelligence despite being modular in form. Marine biologists have proposed hypotheses ranging from coordinated swarms of polychaetes to undiscovered vent-adapted superorganisms, yet none account for the scale, patterning, and environmental precision observed. Individual segments are connected chemically or neurologically in ways still unmeasurable, allowing instantaneous, seamless responses across the colony. Even the most sophisticated imaging systems fail to capture its entirety, giving only fragments that suggest a staggering, continuous organism. Each new observation challenges current understanding of how life can organize itself in the deep ocean. ROV pilots describe faint currents and sediment clouds stirred by movement, revealing the creature's path long after it has vanished from view. Tiny particles and microbial detritus trace the colony's passage, giving indirect evidence of its breadth and form. Subtle disturbances in the vent plumes and water flow hint at behaviors that extend beyond simple locomotion, suggesting a level of environmental interaction that may exceed feeding or movement. Pilots often report an eerie sensation of being observed, a feeling compounded by the undulating presence of countless worm-like segments moving just out of focus. These traces leave questions of scale and intent unanswered, yet the impact on the seabed is unmistakable. Even under high-resolution cameras and sonar, the colony appears fragmented, giving only glimpses of a massive organism that stretches beyond measurable limits. The apparent continuity of the Colossus defies human comprehension, as though a single consciousness or guiding principle directs its motion. Its slow, methodical progress across abyssal plains and trench ridges suggests an ancient adaptation, a life form that has existed long enough to perfect both collective survival and environmental mastery. No single specimen has been captured, sampled, or catalogued in its entirety, and attempts to extrapolate its morphology or internal structure remain speculative. What is undeniable is the impression it leaves, a presence, immense and alien, moving silently beneath the deep Pacific waters. The Pacific worm colony Colossus is not merely a creature, it is a networked enigma, a sprawling assembly of countless segments that move in near-perfect coordination, stretching across the seabed in patterns that challenge conventional understanding of life. Each segment thrives under crushing pressures and near-freezing darkness, drawing energy from chemosynthetic bacteria while remaining connected to the larger colony in ways that remain a mystery. Its presence alters the surrounding environment, stirring sediment clouds, redirecting currents, and creating temporary microhabitats for smaller organisms. Observers cannot determine where one part ends and another begins, and every expedition reveals only fragments of its immense structure, leaving scientists to wonder how such a modular organism maintains cohesion across such vast distances. Even in the abyss, some organisms move in patterns that the human mind cannot fully comprehend. The Gulf of Alaska Spiral Entity. A twisting, spiralling form appeared on sonar screens, its curves vast and precise, unlike any known deep-sea organism. Researchers and ROV operators began referring to it as the Gulf of Alaska Spiral Entity, a creature whose shape and motion immediately defied conventional understanding. The helical formation stretched hundreds of meters across abyssal plains and trench slopes, rotating slowly yet with consistent rhythm, leaving a faint twisting trail in the water. Its presence suggested a design or organization unlike ordinary deep-sea fauna, one that interacted with both currents and sediment while remaining elusive to observation. Scientists could not determine whether it was a single organism, modular colony, or an as-yet unknown combination of both. Each observation offered fleeting glimpses of the entity's structure, revealing only fragments of its full spiral form while leaving the rest obscured by darkness and shifting particulate clouds. Shadows cast by its coils sometimes merged with ridges, giving the impression of an immense twisting tunnel suspended in the abyss. Sediment and krill swirled around its rotating structure, responding to currents that seemed subtly manipulated by the entity itself. Tiny amphipods and mesopelagic organisms were drawn into the vortex of movement, forming ephemeral clouds that highlighted the spiral's path. Submersible cameras captured these interactions, showing the entity both affecting and navigating its environment with remarkable precision. Researchers noted that the helical rotations appeared synchronized across sections of the formation, with patterns suggesting coordinated behavior that no known species could achieve over such distances. Even currents traveling through nearby trenches seemed to bend and spiral slightly in response, an effect that hinted at the immense hydrodynamic presence of the entity. The surrounding waters carried faint eddies and turbulence, evidence that the spiral entity's motion extended influence beyond its immediate body, hinting at a presence that could shape its environment without revealing its full form. Segments of the creature hinted at modular construction, resembling enormous siphonophores, yet moving with a cohesion that defied explanation. Individual components appeared flexible and elongated, capable of twisting independently while maintaining the continuity of the larger spiral. Observers speculated that these segments might communicate chemically, electrically, or through subtle hydrodynamic cues, allowing near-instantaneous coordination across hundreds of meters. Unlike siphonophores, which often form colonies with visible separation, the spiral entity's body seemed continuous, forming a flowing, uninterrupted helix. Its structure conveyed both elegance and otherworldliness, and the sense of scale was amplified by the shadows cast along trench walls and ridges. In rare instances, bioluminescent flashes from neighbouring deep-sea organisms reflected against its coils, revealing intricate patterns and emphasising the creature's three-dimensional geometry. Marine biologists struggled to classify the formation, proposing possibilities from unknown cephalopods to coordinated multi-species colonies, each theory faltering against its precise spiral geometry. Known deep-sea organisms with bioluminescence or modularity could not reproduce the observed rotations, nor could they maintain synchronized motion over such distances. Attempts to model the entity mathematically suggested an underlying intelligence or guiding principle, yet Without evidence of a brain or central nervous system, these ideas remained speculative. The creature's interactions with currents, sediment, and swarming prey implied both adaptability and purpose, challenging assumptions about movement and organisation in abyssal environments. Every new observation raised as many questions as it answered, reinforcing the sense that this entity existed at the edge of known biology, operating according to rules unseen by human science. Describing a vertigo-inducing spectacle, observers noted how overlapping rotations and shifting shadows made it impossible to gauge the entity's true scale. ROV pilots recounted moments when the spiral appeared infinite, coiling and uncoiling as if extending beyond measurable limits. Light from submersibles and instrument panels reflected off fine sediment, exaggerating the spiral's curvature and heightening the disorienting effect. Scientists attempting to capture continuous footage often missed segments entirely, creating fragmented recordings that hinted at a far larger organism than could be documented. The interplay of darkness, shadow, and movement amplified the entity's alien presence, leaving human observers with a persistent sense of being dwarfed by something incomprehensibly vast. The rhythmic rotation of its helical coils produced a subtle, almost hypnotic current that pulled small organisms along predictable arcs, suggesting an interaction with the environment that went beyond mere locomotion. Even repeated passes with ROVs and sonar could capture only fragments, leaving scientists with partial views and questions that no current technology could resolve. The spiral entity vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, slipping into trenches or behind underwater ridges, only to re-emerge along slightly altered paths. Observers speculated on its depth range, rotation speed, and feeding behaviour, yet each hypothesis relied on incomplete data. Its interactions with krill swarms, sediment clouds, and microcurrents hinted at a level of environmental adaptation that no known organism exhibited. In essence, the Gulf of Alaska spiral entity remained a fleeting enigma, a living pattern in constant motion, revealing its presence only in fragments that teased the limits of human comprehension. Through depths that human instruments can scarcely gauge, it twists silently, leaving a spiral signature that may never be fully understood. The Azores abyssal window creature. Light from the submersible revealed a massive translucent form, its surface rippling like liquid glass, while faint shapes shifted inside. Scientists and deep-sea researchers quickly coined it the Azores abyssal window creature, a name reflecting its eerie, semi-transparent body and the glimpses of internal movement captured on high-definition cameras. The creature's dimensions were staggering, extending tens of meters across the abyssal plane, yet its outline remained elusive, bending and refracting in the faint light. Observers could make out what appeared to be segmented chambers or organ-like formations, flowing rhythmically as if orchestrated by an internal pulse. Its undulating motion was slow but deliberate, rising and falling with the currents while seemingly maintaining a cohesive form. Despite multiple expeditions, no one could discern where one internal structure ended and another began, leaving an unsettling impression of both biological sophistication and architectural design. Tiny bioluminescent organisms hovered near its windows, tracing the pulsing patterns of movement that seemed to originate from within the creature itself. Lanternfish and amphipods occasionally drifted through these illuminated cavities, becoming momentary silhouettes against the translucent backdrop. Submersibles captured these interactions in fleeting frames, showing how the creature subtly influenced its surrounding environment. Currents within the Azores abyss, normally turbulent with descending marine snow and nutrient flows, appeared partially guided by the creature's presence, twisting in delicate arcs as it drifted. Each pass revealed only fragments, but the evidence suggested an organism capable of manipulating or responding to minute hydrodynamic shifts, a feature unseen in any previously documented deep-sea species. Light passing through the window creature refracted unpredictably, creating ghostly prisms and shadowed corridors that seemed almost architectural. Sonar pulses often returned anomalous readings near its translucent form, as if it distorted sound waves and produced overlapping echoes. Tiny particles of marine snow became suspended in its interior cavities, drifting along invisible currents independent of the surrounding water. Its surface sometimes shimmered with subtle iridescence, reflecting faint bioluminescent signals from neighbouring plankton, suggesting an intricate internal lattice. Researchers speculated these optical effects might serve camouflage, communication or environmental sensing, yet the true function remained unknown. Even brief glimpses evoke the impression of a living window into a world beyond human comprehension. Its anatomy defied classification, appearing part gelatinous, part skeletal, with undulating internal structures that suggested organs in motion. Tentacle-like filaments floated along its exterior, some retracting and expanding, creating the impression of active sensing or subtle locomotion. The transparent body allowed scientists to witness a level of internal complexity rarely observed outside laboratory conditions, yet the purpose and function of these structures remained opaque. Fluid-filled chambers seemed to contract and expand in synchronized patterns, hinting at a circulatory or respiratory system, unlike any known marine organism. Even the subtlest pulsations cast shifting shadows across the abyssal floor, reinforcing the sense that the creature operated as a singular coordinated entity despite its immense and fragmented appearance. Scientists proposed a series of hypotheses, from giant ctenophore relatives to unknown siphonophores, but none fully explained the visible complexity within its transparent body. Giant ctenophores were known for their delicate gelatinous structures, but none reached this scale or displayed such coordinated internal motion. Multi-species siphonophore colonies offered parallels in modular function, yet could not replicate the apparent continuity of the window creature's internal architecture. Researchers also considered unknown abyssal cephalopods or crustacean aggregations, but these theories failed under close examination of movement patterns and internal flow. Every new observation challenged existing taxonomy, forcing scientists to reconsider the limits of biological organization in extreme deep-sea environments. Observers described a sense of cognitive dissonance, as shifting shadows and internal pulsations made the creature seem simultaneously alive and architectural. ROV pilots reported a subtle vertigo when attempting to track its form, with each adjustment of the camera revealing new structures and vanishing others. Light refracted through its translucent body in unexpected ways, creating illusions of tunnels, chambers, and networks that may or may not exist. Bioluminescent organisms passing through or near the creature occasionally highlighted these structures, producing brief flashes that resembled internal activity or glowing organs. These fleeting moments reinforced the alien nature of the window creature, leaving observers questioning whether they were witnessing biological function or a form of natural optical phenomena amplified by extreme depths. Even after repeated footage and sonar mapping, only fragments of its form could be captured, leaving the full scale and organization a persistent enigma. The creature would drift along abyssal slopes or through deep channels and then vanish into shadowed ridges, leaving scattered traces of sediment disturbances and drifting organisms as the only clues to its presence. Analysts noted that these residual patterns followed no predictable path, suggesting a complex understanding of its environment or an inherent adaptability evolved over millennia. Despite decades of deep-sea research in the Azores abyss, the window creature remained a singular phenomenon, offering tantalizing insight into life forms capable of transparency, internal complexity, and interaction with an environment few could truly measure. It drifts silently through depths that human perception can scarcely grasp, revealing glimpses of a structure that may be part organism, part living architecture, and entirely unknowable. The Philippine trench-winged predator. A sudden ripple tore through the lanternfish swarm, scattering tiny bodies as if an unseen presence had sliced the currents with invisible wings. In the crushing darkness of the Philippine Trench, where sunlight never penetrates and water pressure reaches nearly 1,000 times that at the surface, life survives only through extraordinary adaptation. Midway through the chaos, researchers identified the suspected cause: the Philippine trench-winged predator, a creature whose very existence was inferred through the precise disturbances it left in its path. Lanternfish and krill, normally drifting in dense coordinated clusters, fractured abruptly, leaving ghostly trails of sediment and displaced water. The trench's jagged walls and deep channels offered perfect cover for ambush, allowing the predator to exploit every shift of current. Even indirect observation suggested a creature large enough to command its territory, moving with an economy of motion that hinted at evolutionary mastery over both the environment and its prey. its elongated fins flexed like sails, bending and twisting with a precision that manipulated the surrounding currents almost imperceptibly. These wing-like appendages were broad at the base, tapering to delicate points capable of minute adjustments, allowing the predator to glide silently through pressure-heavy waters while conserving energy. Researchers speculated that the fin served multiple purposes: propulsion, steering, and perhaps even subtle sensing of microcurrents generated by prey. The body, muscular yet streamlined, seemed designed for bursts of acceleration and agile maneuvering in 3 dimensions. Comparisons to deep-sea oarfish and dragonfish revealed functional parallels, but nothing matched the combination of stealth, wing-assisted motion, and apparent cognitive precision exhibited by this predator. Even the faint reflections of bioluminescent flashes from startled prey hinted at a creature both aware and calculating. Ambush after ambush unfolded along the trench walls, where swarms of prey fragmented into intricate patterns of empty water. Lanternfish scattered in erratic yet predictable bursts, revealing channels through which the predator moved with alarming accuracy. Sediment plumes marked their invisible path, while brief flashes of displaced bioluminescence betrayed sudden, unseen motion. The predator appeared to anticipate prey reactions, exploiting the trench's ridges, overhangs, and narrow corridors to strike without being seen. Its hunting style suggested a rare combination of instinct and environmental awareness, as though it could calculate the trajectories of fleeing prey while remaining perfectly concealed in the surrounding darkness. The creature's sensory adaptations, though unconfirmed, were likely extraordinary. Highly sensitive lateral lines may detect minute pressure variations, while specialized cells could respond to faint bioluminescent signals from prey kilometers away. Each wing may act as both a fin and a sensor, detecting microcurrents and vibrations in the water column. Such capabilities would allow the predator to track movement in near-complete darkness, to calculate the fastest strike paths, and to anticipate prey evasions. The interactions between its wings, body, and environment suggested a sophisticated sensory network, evolved over millennia to navigate an abyssal world that would crush most other life forms. Its influence extended beyond immediate prey, subtly reshaping the trench ecosystem itself. Small predators altered their routes to avoid areas of repeated disturbance, while prey distributions shifted to regions temporarily safe from ambush. Even the flow of microcurrents and sediment plumes adapted to its presence, producing transient zones of calm where ambushes could be executed efficiently. Over time, this predator appeared to sculpt local ecological patterns, its hunting behavior leaving marks on the environment that persisted long after it had vanished. It was both a hunter and an architect of its shadowed realm. Its impact measured not in bodies alone, but in the rearrangement of entire communities of abyssal life. Evidence of its existence remained frustratingly indirect. Broken krill clouds, displaced sediment, and fleeting flashes of reflective wing tissue were all that deep-sea sensors and submersibles captured. Shadowy silhouettes occasionally crossed sonar or camera fields, vanishing before operators could register their scale or form. Repeated tracking attempts yielded only fragments, yet patterns in prey behavior and water displacement revealed an intelligence capable of adapting to both prey and predator detection. Every fleeting observation reinforced the idea of a creature perfectly adapted to remain invisible, while commanding control over its hunting grounds. Even in its absence, the trench seemed charged with anticipation, currents trembling with the memory of movement. Occasional flashes of reflected bioluminescence and the sudden scattering of prey hinted at the predator's ongoing presence. Researchers speculated on its range, hunting frequency, and potential breeding behaviors, but each theory was incomplete, supported only by indirect evidence. Its wing-like fins, strategic use of terrain, and apparent cognitive acuity combined to make a being that defied classification and challenged human understanding of deep-sea predation. The Philippine trench-winged predator moved with precision that no human tracking device could fully capture, existing in the space between observation and imagination. The abyssal world is reshaped with every unseen strike by a predator that cuts through the darkness with silent wings, its presence felt more than seen. The Sargasso Void Swimmer. Vast stretches of floating sargassum drifted silently across the sunlit Sargasso Sea, forming islands of suspended life in a nearly endless expanse of water. The surface reflected a wavering mosaic of sky and shadow, broken only by the occasional flicker of bioluminescence from the depths below. Within this drifting world, researchers hypothesized the presence of a creature so elusive it seemed to merge with the open sea itself. Known as the Sargasso void swimmer, it occupied a realm where sunlight fades into twilight and the boundaries between organism and environment blur. Though sightings were rare and often indirect, its influence was discernible in subtle patterns: slight gaps in dense mats of sargassum, drifting crustaceans veering along unexpected paths, and faint disturbances in the current that hinted at something larger, moving with a silent, fluid authority. Amid the mats, translucent membranes glimmered, trailing appendages that curved gracefully through the water as if sculpting the currents themselves. Its body, nearly invisible against the shifting backdrop of sea and sky, suggested adaptations to both concealment and effortless motion. Hints of reflective tissue and delicate, wing-like fins indicated an evolutionary mastery over buoyancy, allowing it to glide across vast distances without visible propulsion. Researchers speculated that its streamlined form minimized energy expenditure, enabling long journeys through sparse mid-ocean environments where sustenance is scattered and unpredictable. Unlike the trench-bound predators of other chapters, the void swimmer relied on elegance and subtlety, moving through its world without disturbing the fragile equilibrium of life around it. Plankton clouds, drifting shrimp and microcrustaceans appeared to react without cause, parting in measured, almost imperceptible arcs. These movements suggested the creature interacted with its environment in ways too subtle for direct observation. Rather than predatory bursts or rapid ambushes, it may have grazed or filtered food with appendages adapted to guide particles toward its mouth, or perhaps engaged in a form of symbiosis, allowing smaller organisms to follow in its wake for protection. The patterns were enigmatic, hinting at behavior shaped both by survival necessity and an uncanny attunement to the rhythms of an open ocean ecosystem. Even in its invisibility, the swimmer left traces of design upon the living mosaic of the Sargasso Sea. Its sensory adaptations remained speculative, yet all evidence pointed to extraordinary awareness. Minute changes in water pressure, faint chemical trails, or subtle bioluminescent glimmers could guide it across kilometers of unmarked sea. Its wing-like fins may have doubled as sensory organs, detecting microcurrents or vibrations caused by drifting organisms. This heightened perception would allow it to navigate vast empty waters, track prey or companions, and remain undetected by virtually any observer. In a habitat where landmarks are few and currents shift unpredictably, such adaptations would be essential for survival, giving the creature a ghost-like presence that eluded both human detection and natural predators. Even the floating sargassum and drifting debris shifted in response, subtly rearranged by the creature's silent passage. Small predators and symbiotic organisms appeared to adjust their positions almost instinctively, as if the water itself had learned to anticipate the void swimmer's presence. These indirect influences extended far beyond immediate food gathering needs, shaping the local distribution of life and creating microclimates in a part of the ocean where environmental cues are scarce. Its existence, while nearly invisible, imposed a quiet dominion over a delicate network of life, an authority exercised without aggression but with undeniable effect. Observations by human researchers were sparse and fragmented. Submersibles caught only ghostly outlines. Sonar detected intermittent anomalies, and scattered pulses of bioluminescence hinted at form and movement. Even the most advanced imaging tools failed to capture the creature in detail, leaving scientists to piece together its presence from subtle, often contradictory data. Each fleeting glimpse suggested an intelligence, or at least a level of environmental awareness, that challenged current understanding of mid-ocean ecology. The swimmer remained a phantom, glimpsed only through the indirect language of displacement and reaction. As it moved through the drifting mats and currents, the Sargasso void swimmer seemed to carry the emptiness of the open ocean with it, leaving subtle distortions that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Shadows lengthened and receded, reflecting off its translucent body and blending with drifting life in a choreography imperceptible to most observers. Currents, light, and floating organisms responded almost instinctively to its passage, leaving temporary patterns that hinted at both presence and intent. In a sea defined by vast isolation, the creature's movements suggested an awareness of its surroundings and an adaptability that elevated it above the ordinary rhythms of drifting life. Across the Sargasso Sea, it moves like a ghostly conductor, shaping currents, guiding unseen organisms, and leaving the open ocean forever marked by its passage. The Indian Ocean Ribbon Titan. Deep beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean, subtle undulations in temperature and current hinted at disturbances that defied conventional explanation. Layers of water, each with its own density and temperature, shifted ever so slightly, creating anomalies that puzzled oceanographers monitoring deep-sea telemetry. Scientists began to suspect that something immense moved through these depths, invisible to direct observation yet detectable through its profound influence on surrounding water. The Indian Ocean Ribbon Titan, as it has come to be known, appeared to inhabit a space far beyond the reach of sunlight, a colossal organism spanning hundreds of meters that stretched along the vertical column of the ocean. Though only glimpsed indirectly, its presence was suggested by displaced plankton, subtle current deviations, and faint, scattered bioluminescent flashes that lingered like echoes in the void. Sonar sweeps revealed a long, shimmering silhouette, its ribbon-like form twisting gently as it navigated through thermal layers. The Titan's body appeared remarkably flexible, with a reflective surface that caught faint glimmers of light from above, creating the illusion of movement without mass. Researchers speculated that its length allowed it to traverse multiple water layers simultaneously, detecting prey and environmental cues while remaining largely hidden from predators. Some segments seemed translucent, while others displayed iridescent patterns, possibly for signalling or camouflage. The sheer scale of the organism challenged conventional understanding of deep-sea life. Even the most advanced imaging equipment could only capture fragmented glimpses, leaving its full form a mystery. Microcurrents bent and twisted around it, carrying plankton and suspended particles in patterns that suggested a force moving with precision and intent. Observers noted how scattered zooplankton shifted subtly when the Titan passed, forming temporary voids and streams within the drifting clouds. These interactions hinted at a creature capable of exerting influence far beyond its immediate body, shaping the behavior of small organisms without overt predation. In an environment where survival depends on scarce resources, such subtle guidance could function both as a feeding strategy and a means of maintaining ecological balance. Unlike active predators in other oceans, the Ribbon Titan appeared to manipulate its environment with elegance, leaving visible traces of its passage that were almost poetic in their impermanence. Along the length of its body, specialized structures may detect chemical signals, water pressure, and even minute temperature gradients. Scientists theorized that these adaptations allowed the Titan to navigate immense vertical and horizontal distances while monitoring prey or potential threats. Its sensory capabilities would need to be extraordinarily sensitive, for the open mid-ocean offers few landmarks and few reliable cues. By integrating environmental data across hundreds of meters, the creature could move efficiently through near-total darkness, making it virtually invisible to human observers and predatory species alike. This degree of perception reinforced the mystery surrounding the Titan, for it was not only large but potentially highly attuned to its surroundings in ways humans cannot yet measure. Schools of small fish and drifting invertebrates adjusted their trajectories subtly in response to its presence, forming fleeting corridors through which the Titan seemed to glide. Even gelatinous plankton displayed micro-adjustments, parting with uncanny coordination along its length. These indirect effects suggested that its influence extended beyond physical presence, creating a network of altered movement patterns in the water column. Observers noted that the creature's passage reshaped the ecosystem temporarily, producing zones of calm or turbulence that disappeared as the organism moved on. Such an effect on an entire swath of the open ocean suggested a scale of ecological dominance rare in solitary mid-ocean species. Human observation remained frustratingly incomplete. Sonar readings often produced elongated echoes that vanished before they could be fully measured. Deep-sea cameras occasionally captured fleeting flashes of reflective tissue only for it to disappear into darkness moments later. Even bioluminescent signals, observed incidentally during exploratory dives, failed to reveal form or structure conclusively. Each partial glimpse reinforced the enigma. The Ribbon Titan existed on a scale and in a mode of life largely beyond human comprehension. Its movements and interactions could only be inferred from environmental data, leaving researchers to reconstruct a creature known more by its effects than its direct observation. Even as it moved unseen, its passage reshaped currents, light, and the distribution of life, leaving the ocean quietly altered in ways that lingered long after the creature had vanished. The interplay of its immense body with the vertical water column suggested that it occupied multiple ecological niches at once, bridging layers, organisms, and microhabitats across a vast three-dimensional range. Observers found themselves contemplating the elegance of an organism that could navigate, feed, and influence an entire portion of the ocean without ever revealing its true form. In the stillness of the deep, its presence was felt rather than seen, a lingering impression of a life form both massive and impossibly elusive. The Indian Ocean Ribbon Titan exists as a ghostly monument to the unknown, a living thread weaving through the depths that no human eye has ever fully traced. The Hadal Zone Pulse Organism. A cluster of deep-sea amphipods moved in unison, their normally erratic swimming suddenly synchronized in pulses that no current or predator could explain. Researchers monitoring the Hadal trenches noticed these anomalies first in baited traps and later in open water observations, where thousands of tiny organisms seemed to respond simultaneously to an invisible rhythm. The behavior repeated across several observation sites, suggesting a single overarching influence rather than isolated incidents. Scientists proposed the existence of an enormous unknown organism, one whose subtle forces could coordinate movement across a sparse and dark environment. Dubbed the Hadal Zone Pulse Organism, it became clear that this entity exerted influence far beyond its physical form, orchestrating life in ways humans had never before encountered in the deep ocean. From these subtle behaviors, scientists inferred the presence of a massive ribbon-like organism, its body producing rhythmic signals that reached across meters of water. Direct observation remained elusive, yet patterns in sonar readings and deep-sea cameras hinted at its immense scale. The organism's pulses were slow but powerful, creating detectable vibrations and minor shifts in water density that smaller creatures instinctively followed. Researchers speculated on its anatomy, suggesting elongated, segmented structures capable of generating these pulses through muscular contractions or internal fluid displacement. Each movement seemed carefully tuned, harmonizing with the natural rhythm of the trench and the behavior of the amphipods, plankton, and microfauna that populated its vertical domain. Bioluminescent plankton responded in precise intervals, glowing and fading in patterns that mirrored the organism's pulse, hinting at a deliberate, possibly communicative rhythm. Scientists were struck by the synchronicity, observing how colonies of glowing microorganisms flickered in tandem with the unseen entity's oscillations. This phenomenon suggested that the Titan not only influenced mechanical behavior, but could interact with light-sensitive lifeforms as well, perhaps as a form of signaling or environmental scanning. The flickering formed ephemeral constellations in the dark abyss, guiding smaller organisms while remaining imperceptible to human observers without the aid of specialized equipment. The deeper the observation, the more intricate these patterns appeared, suggesting intelligence or a sophisticated instinctive mechanism driving the pulses. The pulse organism's influence extended to microfauna, which adjusted their positions and orientation as though following an invisible guiding force along the trench floor. Tiny crustaceans, segmented worms, and even soft-bodied gelatinous species demonstrated coordinated avoidance and alignment behaviors, reacting to pulses that carried through water hundreds of meters above them. The rhythmic disturbances created transient zones of altered sediment, shifting microorganisms and nutrient particles in a subtle, almost hypnotic dance. This indirect manipulation indicated that the organism operated without overt aggression, reshaping its surroundings to facilitate movement, feeding, or perhaps reproductive strategies in ways that left no visible trace of the organism itself. Even small predators seemed affected, hesitating in ambush or redirecting hunting paths, their behavior reshaped by the subtle oscillations of light and movement generated by the Titan. Observers noted how predatory amphipods and deep-sea fish paused or veered from their usual routes, as though sensing a threat or an energy field that humans could not measure directly. This ripple effect created zones of temporary calm and altered predator-prey interactions, producing fleeting ecological equilibria within the trench. Such influence suggested that the organism's pulsing served multiple functions: navigation, communication, and indirect ecological control, all performed without ever revealing its form to human eyes. Human explorers captured fragments of this interaction, fleeting flashes on deep-sea cameras, unusual sonar patterns, and rhythmic disturbances that suggested a living, pulsing presence. Each expedition yielded tantalizing clues: a brief luminescent flash, a vibrating patch of water, a trail of synchronized movement, but never a full view of the organism itself. Even autonomous deep-sea probes recorded anomalies that could not be explained by known species or physical phenomena. These piecemeal observations only heightened the mystery, forcing scientists to construct a composite understanding from environmental reactions rather than direct sighting. The Hadal Zone pulse organism remained an enigma, both omnipresent and unseen, a ghost in the pressure-shrouded deep. Each pulse left the Hadal Zone momentarily transformed, an imperceptible choreography of life that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, leaving researchers both awed and mystified. The deep trench seemed to breathe in rhythm with an unseen giant, every oscillation reinforcing the sense of a presence that was not merely biological but architectural, a living framework shaping the trench's ecology. Over time, patterns suggested a long evolutionary adaptation, a species perfectly tuned to life in crushing pressure, perpetual darkness, and sparse resources. Its pulses created subtle pathways, guided microfauna, and sculpted ephemeral ecological structures that no human could trace fully, leaving a haunting impression of order emerging from the abyss. Unseen in the Hadal Zone, this organism exerts its influence through the rhythmic choreography of deep-sea creatures, marking its presence in the ocean's shadowed depths. The Bermuda Abyssal Humanoid Silhouette. The first anomaly appeared as a shadow on the submersible's low-light camera, a faint outline rising from the trench floor that resembled a humanoid form suspended in the dark. At first, operators assumed it was an optical illusion or a misalignment of the camera lens, yet repeated sightings at different locations in the Bermuda Abyss defied conventional explanation. The silhouette maintained proportions vaguely reminiscent of a human figure, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, elongated appendages, and an upright stance that seemed impossible for typical deep-sea fauna. Its fleeting appearances were accompanied by subtle water disturbances and minor sediment shifts, hinting at a mass and volume much larger than any known creature recorded in the area. The name Bermuda Abyssal Humanoid Silhouette emerged among the research teams, chosen as much for its descriptive accuracy as for the unsettling strangeness it conveyed. Its movements were slow and deliberate, subtle shifts suggesting jointed limbs or elongated appendages, yet currents and drifting detritus blurred the line between shape and illusion. Analysts noted the fluidity of motion, contrasting with the rigid appearance of sunken debris and rock formations. The humanoid silhouette sometimes seemed to glide, at other moments almost float in place, as if weight and buoyancy were controlled in ways unlike any known organism. Investigators speculated that muscular hydrostats, flexible cartilage, or other unusual structural adaptations could allow such movements, but without direct observation, these remained theoretical. The creature's posture and rhythm suggested intention rather than random drift, raising questions about its possible intelligence or instinctive precision. Sediment clouds reacted to each motion, scattering in patterns that hinted at mass and presence far larger than the submersible could fully capture, while nearby plankton oscillated in response to invisible vibrations. Traces of disturbed detritus lingered for minutes, suggesting that the silhouette exerted a localized but significant effect on the seafloor. Small fish, jelly-like invertebrates, and mobile amphipods altered their movements, forming corridors or voids in its wake. These indirect interactions provided the only consistent evidence of the organism's existence, forcing researchers to study the traces it left rather than the entity itself. Each observation reinforced the sense of scale, suggesting a body capable of influencing the abyssal ecosystem while remaining largely unseen. The silhouette's surface reflected minimal light, occasionally revealing faint bioluminescent patches that flickered unpredictably, suggesting adaptive signaling or protective camouflage against the abyssal darkness. Scientists proposed that these flashes could function as communication with conspecifics, warnings to predators, or mechanisms to confuse prey. The irregularity of the light patterns made it impossible to determine whether they were deliberate or incidental. Despite repeated observation attempts, no consistent bioluminescent rhythm emerged, leaving the phenomenon enigmatic. The deep-sea environment amplified the effect. Even the slightest reflection became a signal in the surrounding darkness, magnifying its presence without revealing detailed anatomy. Other life forms seemed to acknowledge its presence, veering around it with caution or forming transient aggregations along the edges of its shadow, leaving indirect traces of an ecological influence never fully understood. Predatory amphipods hesitated in ambush. Scavengers abandoned detritus trails, and drifting plankton adjusted their trajectories in subtle ways. These behavioural patterns suggested that the silhouette exerted influence across multiple trophic levels without active predation. Researchers speculated that its humanoid shape might trigger innate recognition responses, causing organisms to respond instinctively to a perceived form that resembled a predatory structure. The cumulative effect was an invisible choreography of life shaped by the silhouette's presence. ROV recordings captured only fragmented glimpses. Sonar data produced elongated echoes that could be misinterpreted, while the deep abyss distorted perspective, making size and proportion difficult to gauge. Camera feeds occasionally registered a shimmering outline or a reflective flash along what appeared to be a limb, but each glimpse was gone within seconds. Attempts to triangulate its size yielded inconsistent results, varying from tens to hundreds of meters depending on water density, light refraction, and the angle of observation. Even the most sophisticated equipment failed to produce a definitive image, leaving scientists reliant on inference, speculation, and environmental response. The challenge of discerning physical reality from optical and technological artifacts became a central tension in studying the silhouette. Every observation left more questions than answers, each frame a reminder of the creature's elusiveness and the strange familiarity of its vaguely humanoid form, defying conventional understanding of deep-sea life. Researchers debated whether the silhouette represented a true organism, a biophysical anomaly, or a previously unknown evolutionary lineage adapted to extreme pressure and darkness. Its humanoid semblance suggested convergent evolution, or perhaps a functional form optimized for specific tasks in the abyssal environment, though no direct evidence confirmed this. The combination of recognizable posture and incomprehensible scale evoked both awe and unease, emphasizing the gulf between human perception and the hidden realities of the deep ocean. The Bermuda abyssal humanoid silhouette lingers unseen, an enigmatic figure hovering in the dark that challenges the boundary between oceanic reality and human perception. The Chilean trench veil creature. A drifting shroud of semi-transparent tissue stretched across the trench floor, undulating with the slow rhythm of deep-sea currents, at first mistaken for a gelatinous bloom. Researchers initially catalogued it as an unusual plankton aggregation, but repeated observations revealed a cohesive, flowing form that maintained structure over dozens of meters. The Chilean trench veil creature, as it was tentatively named, defied conventional categorization. It had no discernible head, limbs, or segmentation, yet it moved with deliberate fluidity. Even in near-freezing temperatures and crushing pressures, its surface appeared flexible and responsive, bending without tearing as if sculpted to accommodate the relentless motion of the abyssal environment. Early expeditions struggled to reconcile its ghostly translucence with the reality of a living, autonomous organism. Noting its size only indirectly, observers inferred it from the way sediment and tiny organisms were displaced, as the veil-like form glided without apparent propulsion. Fine silt lifted from the seafloor traced elongated arcs, temporarily revealing the creature's contours, while clusters of amphipods and other microfauna were swept gently aside. Its movements did not resemble swimming. Instead, it appeared to flow, folding and unfolding like a vast ribbon suspended in viscous water. Researchers speculated that hydrostatic pressure and internal structural support allowed it to maintain shape while drifting. The slow pace of motion contributed to its elusiveness, creating a sense of effortless, almost hypnotic grace that belied its scale. Faint flashes of bioluminescence traced along its surface, revealing delicate folds and layered structures that shimmered like fractured glass, in the abyssal darkness. These flashes were irregular, appearing along ridges or folds that caught the light from submersible lamps at certain angles. Scientists debated their function. Some hypothesized that they were passive reflections of ambient light, while others suggested active bioluminescent signaling to communicate with other deep-sea organisms or confuse predators. The patterning was never consistent, but it lent the creature a spectral quality, transforming its flowing form into a constantly shifting play of light and shadow that made it nearly impossible to capture accurately on camera. Small amphipods and plankton drifted through the veil, their movements subtly redirected as if by invisible walls of translucent tissue. Tiny crustaceans hesitated before passing through, while delicate plankton filaments bent and swayed in response to currents shaped by the creature's body. These interactions provided the only measurable evidence of the organism's presence for scientists. Predators were equally affected. Deep-sea fish and cephalopods adjusted their hunting paths, avoiding the veil's vicinity in ways that suggested instinctive recognition of its space-altering influence. Though no attacks were observed, the creature indirectly orchestrated microecosystem behavior, altering life patterns without contact. Occasionally, scientists observed faint filament-like extensions trailing from the main veil, drifting independently like delicate tendrils that probed the surrounding water. These tendrils appeared capable of sensing microcurrents and minute changes in the water column, suggesting a primitive sensory system. Some filaments carried tiny clusters of bioluminescent cells, possibly for luring microscopic prey or communicating with other members of its species. Their flexibility allowed them to navigate tight spaces among rocks and sediment without disturbing the main body, hinting at a modular anatomy that could extend or retract depending on environmental conditions. Such adaptations might explain how the creature interacts with both the water column and the trench floor, influencing local ecosystems in ways previously unobserved. Scientists speculated on the creature's structural composition, considering hyperthin membranes, flexible collagen-like fibers, and adaptations to withstand crushing pressures while remaining almost entirely invisible. Its transparency suggested a defensive strategy, allowing it to avoid detection while drifting in a region with scarce resources. Yet the ability to maintain form over tens of meters without rigid support implied an evolutionary adaptation beyond known gelatinous species. The balance between pliability and persistence suggested a body designed to interact with its environment subtly, influencing surrounding fauna and sediment while remaining functionally intangible to human observation. Cameras struggled to capture the form in detail. Light refraction, movement of the water column, and low visibility created illusions that made its true shape impossible to confirm. Every frame was a challenge. The creature alternately vanished and reappeared, sometimes leaving a shimmering veil in its wake, at other times blending entirely into the darkness. Even high-definition ROV footage failed to provide definitive anatomical information, leaving researchers to rely on indirect measurements from sediment displacement, currents, and bioluminescent patterns. The difficulty of documentation only heightened the sense of mystery, reinforcing the perception that the veil creature existed at the edge of human understanding. Each sighting left researchers questioning perception itself, as the veil's movements were mesmerizing yet alien, suggesting a life form that defied conventional understanding of deep-sea biology. It was neither predator nor prey in the conventional sense, yet it commanded attention, subtly asserting presence within a remote ecosystem that humans could barely observe. Some scientists speculated on its evolutionary origin, imagining an ancient lineage perfectly adapted to deep-sea extremes, evolving transparency and fluid motion as survival strategies. Its drifting, ethereal form challenged all assumptions about size, mass, and the range of possible life in the abyss, leaving every encounter both awe-inspiring and confounding. Fleeting traces mark its passage through the abyss, where its flowing, translucent form drifts unseen, a phantom of light and shadow. The Somali submarine lurker. Records from mid-20th century naval expeditions first noted unusual sonar echoes deep in the Somali Basin, initially dismissed as equipment anomalies. Operators described low-frequency blips moving against the natural currents, distinct from whales or known fish species. At the time, the technology was rudimentary, and skepticism prevailed. Yet similar readings appeared repeatedly in logs across successive missions, suggesting a persistent source. Researchers cautiously referred to it as a submarine anomaly, a term meant to mask uncertainty while hinting at an unknown presence. It was not until decades later, when sonar resolution improved, that scientists began to notice the pattern's consistency and scale, revealing something that moved with deliberate, yet enigmatic purpose beneath the waves. Decades later, research vessels documented repeated patterns of underwater disturbances, their motions inconsistent with any known species or current. Scientists meticulously charted shifts in water density, small whirlpools, and sudden changes in acoustic feedback, all pointing to a large, elusive entity. These movements were not random. Subtle curves and pauses suggested intelligence, or at least a capacity to navigate complex underwater terrain. Vessels recorded intermittent silences and bursts of motion that defied expectation, further separating the anomalies from familiar deep-sea life. Each detection renewed interest and skepticism in equal measure as the evidence teetered on the edge between reality and the imagination of observers. Scientists catalogued conflicting measurements. Some reports suggested a massive elongated form, while others implied a segmented body moving with eerie precision. Estimates varied wildly, spanning tens of meters to lengths rivaling small submarines, yet no direct visual confirmation existed. The absence of tangible imagery made every interpretation provisional, reliant on sonar contours, wave displacement, and water column anomalies. Some hypothesized a multi-limbed organism, others a singular continuous mass capable of undulating silently through extreme pressure zones. This ambiguity only heightened fascination, as each new report seemed both credible and impossible, a puzzle resisting classification even under rigorous scientific methodology. Local sailors spoke of dark shapes that followed their vessels, tales passed through generations, yet strangely aligned with modern scientific observations. Stories described forms that remained below sight, casting long shadows in calm waters and occasionally rising close enough to glimpse but vanish before identification. These oral histories, often dismissed as superstition, gained new weight when compared with decades of sonar and research logs. The consistency of behavioral patterns across centuries suggested a presence deeply embedded in the ecosystem, yet entirely unrecognized by formal taxonomy. Human memory and anecdote became intertwined with technical documentation, forming a mosaic of indirect evidence hinting at the lurker's reality. Among methane seeps and hydrothermal vent currents, oceanographers occasionally observed strange interactions with the lurker, suggesting it may use these features for movement and sustenance. Analysis of sediment disturbances near vents revealed traces of unusually large bite marks and suction-like depressions, implying a feeding strategy adapted to high-pressure chemical environments. Researchers hypothesized that the lurker may use the rising mineral-rich plumes to navigate silently, letting turbulence mask its movement while scanning for prey. Such behavior would indicate a highly specialized predator capable of integrating environmental cues into hunting techniques, a feature unseen in known abyssal species. By leveraging these natural features, the Somali submarine lurker could traverse hundreds of meters vertically without expending significant energy, making it an even more elusive inhabitant of the deep. Modern analysis hypothesized possible origins, ranging from undiscovered cephalopods to enormous cartilaginous fish, yet none fully accounted for the recorded behaviors. Some suggested it might be a previously unknown adaptation of deep-sea predators, employing extreme stealth, pressure-resistant bodies, and undulating locomotion to evade detection. Others entertained the idea of a highly social organism, capable of coordinated movement across vast distances, although no supporting data existed. The creature's elusiveness remained its defining trait, a testament to the limitations of observation in one of Earth's most inaccessible environments. Each hypothesis invited scrutiny, debate, and further expeditions, but none yielded conclusive results. Despite advanced ROV surveys and deep-sea cameras, researchers often recovered only partial readings, sonar blips, and fleeting shadows that refused confirmation. Attempts to track it consistently failed, as the lurker seemed to anticipate and evade observation, slipping between instrument ranges and natural currents. Instruments occasionally recorded strange vibrations or sudden movements of sediment, but direct capture of shape or anatomy remained elusive. This persistent invisibility created both frustration and intrigue, encouraging speculation that the creature's intelligence or evolutionary adaptations were precisely tuned for stealth. Even the most sophisticated technology struggled against a being seemingly designed to exist beyond human perception. Each new anomaly rekindled debate in scientific circles, leaving the lurker suspended between documented reality and speculative imagination, its existence unproven yet compelling. Conferences, papers, and informal discussions debated the meaning of accumulated evidence, often returning to the same conundrum. How could so many independent observations converge without the organism being real? Its presence challenged assumptions about size limits, deep-sea adaptability, and predator behavior, forcing researchers to consider possibilities beyond current marine biology. The Somali submarine lurker remained an enigma, its traces etched into logs, sonar charts, and the memories of those who sailed the basin, forever elusive and deeply mysterious. Somewhere in the depths, the Somali submarine lurker glides silently, a ghost woven from reports, echoes, and whispers that may never be fully understood. The Kermadec Abyss Lantern Predator. In the black expanse of the Kermadec Trench, where light never penetrates and pressure reaches levels that would crush ordinary vessels, explorers have reported the presence of a creature so alien it seems to defy the known rules of biology. Among the trench's labyrinthine channels and deep-sea ravines, a predator emerges, later identified by researchers as the lantern predator, notable not for its body but for the eerie luminescence of its jaw structure. The glow pulses rhythmically, as though it possesses a life independent from any discernible form behind it, drifting through the abyss with an uncanny autonomy. The initial recordings from deep-sea ROVs captured the jaw suspended in water, moving deliberately, unaccompanied by fins, tentacles, or any visible body, a phenomenon that left marine biologists questioning whether they were observing a conventional organism or something entirely different. Voyagers navigating the Kermadec Abyss first encountered traces of the lantern predator through scattered bioluminescent glimmers, fleeting flashes that illuminated surrounding sediment before vanishing into darkness. The jaw's light is not a soft ambient glow like that of anglerfish. It is concentrated and almost surgical, capable of casting faint shadows on the abyssal floor tens of meters away. When scientists followed its movement with high-resolution cameras, the structure seemed to adjust its orientation with startling precision, angling itself toward potential prey or investigators' equipment in a manner suggestive of awareness. Some researchers theorize that the jaw may operate independently through a decentralized neural network or a specialized hydrostatic mechanism, allowing it to respond to stimuli without a central body. The bioluminescent pattern of the lantern predator exhibits remarkable complexity, producing gradients of green, blue, and amber light that ripple along the jaw like shifting pigments. Each pulse varies in duration and intensity, and while some episodes appear synchronized with surrounding prey activity, others continue with no apparent external trigger. This enigmatic signaling challenges conventional understanding, as even the most advanced deep-sea predators rely on their entire bodies to manipulate light or lure prey. The precision of the lantern predator's movement suggests a mastery of its environment that no other jaw-only organism is known to possess. ROV footage has revealed an additional anomaly. The jaw occasionally rotates in slow, deliberate arcs, as though surveying its surroundings, yet it leaves no wake in the water and produces no detectable acoustic signature. Sensors that can normally pick up the faint hydrodynamic disturbances of swimming animals record nothing here, reinforcing the impression that this predator exists partially outside known physical constraints. Researchers have speculated about an organ capable of self-propulsion independent of visible anatomy, a sort of biological levitation that, if proven, would represent a profound evolutionary adaptation to the extreme pressures and darkness of the Kermadec Abyss. Offering further clues, the sediment in this trench reveals details about the lantern predator's hunting habits. Plumes of silt and particulate matter appear suspended for minutes after the jaw passes, suggesting that it does not touch the seafloor directly yet exerts enough influence to disturb the substrate. Occasional encounters have shown faint puncture marks on small deep-sea fish and crustaceans, implying that the jaw's mobility allows it to capture prey from unexpected angles. In some instances, captured specimens were found to be missing internal organs while leaving the exterior intact, hinting at a feeding strategy designed to minimize energy expenditure while maximizing nutrient intake, a trait found in only the most efficient abyssal predators. Over extended periods, attempts to track the lantern predator have yielded largely inconclusive results. The creature has been observed in trenches stretching hundreds of kilometers, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. Its glowing jaw can remain stationary for extended periods, hovering like a lantern in the abyssal darkness, then suddenly dart toward prey in movements both rapid and fluid. The creature's apparent intelligence is further suggested by its interaction with submersibles. In multiple documented cases, ROVs approaching at low speed report the jaw subtly altering direction, maintaining distance while still observing the equipment, as if evaluating the threat or the opportunity. While some have theorized that the lantern predator represents a fragment of a larger unseen organism, no evidence has yet emerged of a connecting body. The jaw itself contains complex muscular structures and sensory tissues, capable of detecting minute pressure changes and bioluminescent signals from potential prey. Genetic samples collected from nearby water have yielded sequences that do not match any known species in global databases, reinforcing the notion that this predator occupies a taxonomic void. The combination of independent motion, sophisticated bioluminescent display, and unexplained feeding strategies suggests a creature evolved to thrive in one of Earth's most inaccessible and extreme environments. Yet it remains a mystery whether it is a remnant of an ancient lineage or a novel evolutionary experiment. Every expedition that has encountered the lantern predator has returned with footage and sensor logs, but few can shake the feeling of having been observed rather than observing. The lighted jaw, floating silently in an ocean devoid of any other form of guidance or illumination, creates the unsettling impression of sentience unbound by conventional anatomy. Researchers continue to debate whether this is a single organism or a phenomenon of distributed intelligence across multiple independent jaws, yet each sighting deepens the trench's reputation as a realm where the rules of biology bend toward the unknowable. Even as scientists prepare more advanced deep-sea missions with improved sensors and autonomous submersibles, the Kermadec abyss guards its secret. No matter how carefully the waters are mapped, no matter how long the cameras watch, the glowing jaw appears to exist in a space between observation and illusion. It drifts with deliberate purpose, illuminating the darkness in pulses of ghostly light, leaving the abyss silent, empty, and watching. Then, as if the darkness itself had swallowed it, the glowing jaw drifted out of sight, leaving only the weightless black void and the lingering sense of being silently observed. The South Atlantic chain body drifter. The chain body drifter stretched along the abyssal plain like a living string of translucent lanterns, each segment moving with uncanny synchronicity, as if guided by an unseen conductor. First observed during a series of deep-sea explorations in the South Atlantic, the creature immediately stood apart from any known organism. It appeared neither fully animal nor plant, and certainly not a single coherent body. Remote-operated vehicles recorded the filamented structure gliding effortlessly over the silty seafloor, its segments aligned along a central filament that swayed with subtle tension. The chain undulated with deliberate rhythm, drifting in a manner that suggested purpose rather than a mere response to currents, leaving marine biologists unsettled by the impression of intentional coordination among its parts. Each segment seemed identical yet subtly distinct, its gelatinous walls flickering with faint bioluminescence that pulsed in patterns impossible to predict. Some pulses were soft, almost imperceptible, while others flared briefly, casting dim, moving shadows over the surrounding terrain. The segments measured between a few centimeters and half a meter in length, and though flexible, they maintained structural integrity against the crushing pressures of the abyssal environment. Early genetic sampling of water near the drifter produced sequences unlike any catalogued species, hinting at a lineage or adaptation previously unknown. Researchers speculated that the filament connecting the segments could serve both as structural support and as a conduit for information, allowing coordinated movement without a central nervous system. As the filamented chain drifted above the silty floor, tiny currents shifted and clouds of sediment rose and lingered in response to its passage, revealing an interaction almost deliberate with the environment. Small abyssal shrimp and flatfish darted around the segments, reacting cautiously to the presence of the unknown organism. The chain appeared to sense these creatures, bending gently toward or away from them with movements that avoided contact while demonstrating spatial awareness. In some frames, sediment plumes formed trailing arcs, suggesting the drifter could subtly manipulate its immediate environment to navigate or perhaps even to flush potential prey. The effect was so precise that it seemed the organism had developed a method to move without disturbing the fragile abyssal equilibrium more than necessary. Bending and flexing, the segments curled around one another in sequences that suggested more than the random movement, a choreography as precise as it was alien. At times, the chain compressed, drawing segments together in tight loops. Moments later, it stretched over several meters, each segment seemingly aware of its neighbor's positions. The movements were gradual but purposeful, indicating a mechanical efficiency unmatched by known modular organisms. Observers noted that the drifter maintained its integrity over large distances, moving with fluidity across steep ridges and small trenches without entanglement, further deepening the mystery of its coordination and control. Sonar readings captured overlapping echoes that hinted at layers of structure invisible to the camera, and yet the drifter's movements left no detectable wake, defying conventional understanding. High-frequency sonar sometimes recorded the filament as multiple lines of oscillating signals, while video footage suggested a single coherent chain. Attempts to tag or approach the drifter with submersible probes resulted in only minimal reaction, the chain adjusting slightly in tension or curvature, hinting at a capacity to detect and respond to disturbances without conventional sensory organs. This combination of subtlety and awareness placed the organism outside traditional taxonomic frameworks. Unlike the chain-form siphonophores catalogued in the Pacific, the drifter's segments appeared to operate in concert without any central node or anchor, challenging assumptions about distributed intelligence in modular organisms. Observers could not discern whether each segment contained independent neural tissue, or if information travelled along the filament as electrical or chemical signals. Its existence suggested that life in extreme environments could evolve organisational systems far removed from conventional animal or plant morphologies, capable of sophisticated behaviour without a central brain. The creature's structural and functional ambiguity made it one of the most puzzling finds of the recent deep-sea explorations. Even when observed over hours, the drifter's configuration shifted as if communicating silently between its segments, an enigmatic pattern that hinted at a form of collective awareness beyond current comprehension. The chain could elongate, fold or coil while maintaining perfect continuity, displaying changes in rhythm and spacing that seemed almost like signalling. Bioluminescent pulses along the filament appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes correlating with nearby fauna, other times occurring spontaneously. Each observation raised more questions. Were these pulses a form of communication, navigation, or something entirely different? No experiment could confirm the purpose, leaving scientists both intrigued and frustrated. ROV lights skimmed along the chain, revealing moments of startling symmetry and sudden dispersal, leaving the crew to wonder whether they were witnessing one entity or a fleeting convergence of many. At times, the chain seemed to fragment into smaller sections, drifting in separate directions before realigning into its coherent form, suggesting a level of modular adaptability unmatched in known marine life. The interaction between human technology and the drifter often revealed more gaps in understanding than insights, highlighting how much remains hidden in the dark expanse of the South Atlantic. Dissolving into the abyssal black, the segments left only a faint, pulsing trail, suggesting the chain had never been whole at all. The Arctic dome organism. Faint arcs of refracted light shimmered through the near-freezing waters, forming patterns that seemed too deliberate to be random. Only when the currents shifted did the semi-rigid dome of the Arctic dome organism slowly reveal itself, hovering above the sedimented abyssal plain like a ghostly silhouette. Its presence was suggested before it could be fully seen. The water around it quivered subtly, microfauna scattered in cautious arcs, and the faintest distortions of light traced the outline of its immense translucent membrane. Scientists had long expected the Arctic deep sea to host strange gelatinous life, yet nothing had prepared them for a structure that moved as a coherent whole without any discernible appendages. The dome's translucent surface stretched and sagged in subtle waves, semi-rigid yet pliable, reflecting the scattered bioluminescence of nearby amphipods and brittle stars like an alien mirror. Observers noted a surface texture that was smooth in some areas, but seemed to contain faint ridges along which light bent differently, hinting at an internal architecture no instrumentation could fully resolve. The creature measured several meters across, though its contours shifted continually, suggesting a body that was not fixed in shape but capable of controlled morphing. Even in the dim Arctic light, the dome appeared almost architectural, a living form with symmetry and structure that defied comparison to known deep-sea organisms. Tiny amphipods and brittle stars scattered around the dome, and fine silt spiraled upward in miniature tornadoes, tracing the organism's presence without ever touching it directly. Currents themselves seemed to bend around the dome in subtle loops, forming patterns inconsistent with ordinary fluid dynamics. Occasionally, small ice fragments and denser sediment deposits appeared to drift away from the dome's proximity, as if it reshaped its immediate environment, a phenomenon that remained unexplained despite careful observation. The creature's interaction with its surroundings was at once delicate and commanding, emphasizing a presence that was sensed more than seen. Sections of the dome expanded and contracted slowly, folding along invisible seams that hinted at a complex internal structure capable of controlled movement without appendages. The flexing was gradual, almost hypnotic, as if the membrane contained a network of unseen channels or fluid compartments guiding its shifts. Unlike jellyfish that pulse rhythmically to propel themselves, this dome maintained an effortless suspension, moving with precision yet producing no detectable currents that would indicate conventional propulsion. Its movements suggested an internal mechanism operating on principles entirely foreign to known biology. Instruments attempting to measure density or elasticity returned inconsistent readings, some indicating a rigid internal framework, others suggesting fluid-like pliancy. High-resolution imaging produced ghostly layers of translucence, capturing the dome as both solid and liquid, stable and mutable. Researchers were unable to determine whether it possessed skeletal structures, hydrostatic systems, or some combination beyond current understanding. Every attempt to quantify its material properties revealed only more uncertainty, emphasizing that the Arctic dome organism resisted conventional scientific categorization. Drifting over sedimented plains beneath the Arctic ice, the dome maintained subtle orientation, avoiding debris yet subtly redirecting microcurrents around its body. Observers recorded how small amphipod swarms adjusted their movements preemptively, as if the dome's shifts communicated unseen cues. Even slight eddies created by the dome seemed to form consistent patterns, suggesting control rather than random displacement. The organism existed in perfect synchronization with its environment, both affecting and responding to forces too weak to register on standard instruments. Some researchers speculated about an internal hydrostatic framework or a distributed network of pressure-sensitive tissue, allowing the dome to respond to subtle changes in its surroundings. Others considered that its membrane might amplify or redirect ambient energy, using near-freezing currents, sediment flows, or even bioluminescent cues from surrounding organisms to guide its motions. Yet no theory could fully account for the coherence of the dome's form or the elegance of its interactions with an environment that should, by all accounts, be inhospitable to such a large, delicate structure. Even when left undisturbed, the dome shifted and flexed, producing light distortions and subtle water movements that left observers questioning whether these motions were deliberate or an emergent property of its unique composition. Hours passed with only slight changes, and yet the dome's presence commanded attention, a silent testament to the uncharted complexity of life in the Arctic abyss. Its alien beauty was paired with an unsettling unknowability, a reminder that the deep sea continues to harbour forms that escape categorization and defy expectation. Slowly it dissolved into the darkness, leaving behind a faint shimmer and the lingering suspicion that the Arctic dome organism had never truly been there at all. The Mediterranean deep red colossus. Through the subtle beams of the submarine lights, a vast crimson form emerged, its gelatinous surface glowing as though lit from within, revealing the presence of the Mediterranean deep red colossus. At first, it appeared almost spectral, suspended in the inky darkness like a slowly moving lantern. Yet its sheer scale became evident as the light swept across its body, stretching tens of meters in length and several meters in width. Scientists noted the unsettling smoothness of its contours, a seamless surface that reflected light in ways no known gelatinous organism could reproduce. The Colossus seemed to occupy the water without displacing it in any noticeable fashion, giving the impression that it floated partially outside the physical laws that governed its surroundings. Its body was both immense and delicate, semi-transparent, with internal filaments and shadowy chambers that twisted slowly, resisting any attempt to discern a true outline. Within the crimson mass, faint striations pulsed rhythmically, like veins of liquid fire moving beneath a translucent skin. Observers compared the effect to refracted light through thick glass, yet with a living fluidity that suggested active control rather than passive optics. Even when captured in high-definition footage, no camera could render its internal architecture with clarity, as though the Colossus continuously shifted, folding and unfolding internal layers that were never the same twice. The Colossus's drift was so subtle that currents barely stirred, yet sediments near its base swirled in miniature spirals, tracing the invisible influence of its massive form. Tiny benthic organisms responded cautiously, scattering in arcs or suspending motion entirely, as if aware of the looming presence above them. Ice fragments and denser sediment particles sometimes veered along the edges of the creature, forming transient patterns that suggested more than simple displacement. The interaction between creature and environment appeared almost deliberate, though the mechanism remained entirely opaque to human understanding. Submarine lights bent and scattered through the creature's crimson tissue, creating layers of impossible depth and giving the impression of appendages that may not exist at all. Certain sections appeared hollow, others dense and opaque, producing illusions of multiple bodies entwined within a single mass. The effect was mesmerizing and disorienting, prompting even experienced deep-sea researchers to question whether they were observing one colossal entity or a temporary convergence of several smaller organisms. Each pulse of reflected light seemed to shift the perceived boundaries of the Colossus, blurring the line between structure and illusion. From time to time, the body flexed inward and outward, elongating in one area while compressing elsewhere, suggesting an internal organization beyond any known gelatinous life. Unlike jellyfish or siphonophores, whose motion is generated by rhythmic pulsation, this creature maintained a slow, deliberate expansion and contraction, with no visible means of propulsion. The movements were almost imperceptible yet unmistakably coordinated, hinting at an internal framework of chambers or fluid channels that allowed subtle control over its enormous shape. Every flex cast refracted light into the surrounding darkness, producing eerie shadows and shifting glimmers that added to its unearthly presence. ROV cameras and high-definition imaging captured flickers of internal motion, yet instruments failed to measure the density or structure accurately, leaving researchers with only more questions. Sonar scans reflected unevenly against its semi-solid body, producing echoes inconsistent with any known organism. Attempts to collect samples were abandoned when the Colossus subtly recoiled from the submersible, altering the water around it without breaking its immense form. Even light spectrometry and chemical analysis of nearby water failed to reveal the secrets of its tissue composition, emphasizing how little could be determined about this deep-sea leviathan. Some theorized that the deep red pigmentation could shield sensitive tissues from the near absence of light, while internal fluid chambers allowed subtle movement, but none could explain the coherence of its form. The coloration absorbed what little ambient light existed at depths exceeding 3,000 meters, simultaneously rendering the creature visible only when illuminated directly by artificial light. The filamentous structures within appeared capable of transmitting forces or adjusting buoyancy in ways unknown to science. The Colossus's combination of scale, translucence, and controlled flexibility suggested adaptations to extreme pressure and near-freezing temperatures that had no analogue in documented Mediterranean deep-sea fauna. Drifting silently through the abyss, the Colossus caused the surrounding water to respond, as if it sensed the observers and the submarine's lights. Sediment swirls, displaced microfauna, and subtle eddies hinted at a being both massive and attentive, capable of influencing its immediate environment with precision. Researchers often remained frozen in their seats, unsure whether the patterns they observed were purposeful or simply a product of the creature's unique physical properties. Hours passed without further movement, yet the impression of life, and of a form entirely alien, lingered in the minds of all who watched. As the crimson giant receded into the darkness, The glow within its body pulsed one last time, leaving a haunting impression of secrets locked deep inside its impossible form. The Mariana Trench multi-eyed entity. Amid the near-total darkness of the Mariana Trench, dozens of tiny lights appeared scattered across a shifting form, each glowing like a star in isolation, yet moving with a curious, deliberate independence, revealing the Mariana Trench multi-eyed entity. The first glimpses were disorienting. The lights seemed to float in mid-water, detached from any solid structure, only gradually coalescing into the faint outline of a vast amorphous body. Observers could not immediately discern its size, yet the distribution of the eyes suggested a scale far larger than any known deep-sea organism, an entity both enormous and impossible to define with conventional measurement. The luminous eyes varied in size, some barely a centimetre across, others nearly the width of a human palm, embedded within an amorphous, semi-transparent body that refused to hold a single shape for more than moments at a time. Each eye emitted a faint phosphorescent glow, warm red and gold in tone, occasionally flickering independently of the others. The body surrounding them shifted subtly, folding and stretching without any visible musculature, creating the illusion of a liquid form that could not be contained by ordinary boundaries. Even the most sophisticated low-light cameras struggled to capture the true arrangement, leaving the creature's overall anatomy frustratingly ambiguous. Some eyes tracked the ROV's movements intently, while others swept the surrounding abyss, their motions uncoordinated yet somehow collectively aware of every detail within their dark domain. Observers described the effect as a distributed gaze, in which intelligence seemed to reside not in a central brain, but across the very lights themselves. The independent motion created an unsettling impression that the entity was aware of multiple dimensions of its environment simultaneously, responding to subtle cues in the water while maintaining a constant observational sweep. Tiny scavengers paused mid-scuttle as sediment clouds swirled around the passing creature, sensing an intelligence in the eye's light across the trench floor. Crustaceans and polychaetes drifted away from clusters of illuminated eyes, forming temporary gaps in their populations that mark the entity's invisible influence. Even currents bent slightly around areas of concentrated luminescence, producing small eddies that suggested interaction, whether active or passive, between the organism and its environment. The trench seemed alive with a strange tension, the eyes orchestrating a quiet awareness across the abyss. Between the clusters of glowing eyes, faint bioluminescent pulses travelled along thin, nearly invisible filaments, suggesting a network of connections that might transmit information across the creature's body. These pulses moved at irregular intervals, sometimes synchronizing across multiple eyes before fading into darkness. Observers noted that nearby plankton occasionally reacted to these subtle flashes, drifting away or hovering temporarily, as though the pulses carried more than light, perhaps sensory cues or chemical signals. Such a system, if confirmed, would indicate an entirely novel method of internal communication among deep-sea organisms, one that could explain the seemingly coordinated awareness of the multi-eyed entity, despite its amorphous structure. The scattered luminescence from the eyes refracted across walls of silt and rock, creating ghostly echoes of motion that made it difficult to distinguish where the body began and the shadows ended. Observers noted that in some frames, multiple reflections of the same eye appeared across the camera lens, giving the illusion of dozens more than existed. Light bent in unexpected ways, hinting at internal structures capable of refracting and amplifying bioluminescence to create both camouflage and communication within the surrounding darkness. High-definition footage captured the flickering, pulsating lights, yet instruments failed to reveal the entity's mass or structure, leaving researchers to rely on the eyes themselves as the clearest evidence of its presence. Sonar scans reflected inconsistently, producing echoes that seemed to suggest multiple overlapping bodies, though no discrete forms were ever confirmed. Attempts to illuminate or sample the surrounding water revealed no chemical or thermal signature sufficient to explain the source of light, leaving only the impression of a being that existed entirely on its own terms, untethered from conventional biology. Some hypothesized that the eyes might be distributed sensory organs controlling an unseen flexible body capable of perceiving threats and prey in ways beyond any known deep-sea animal, though the creature's true anatomy remained an enigma. The independent yet coordinated movements of the eyes could allow it to monitor a wide area simultaneously, perhaps even communicating internally through undetectable neural or chemical networks. Its adaptation to the Bonin Trench's extreme pressure and near-freezing temperatures, combined with the unusual luminosity, suggested a species evolved far beyond the familiar constraints of abyssal life. Even as the body receded into obscurity, the eyes continued to move, blinking and rotating independently, leaving the observers to wonder whether intelligence resided in the collective gaze rather than a centralized brain. Each light seemed to survey a separate corner of the darkness, scanning, calculating, or perhaps merely existing with a sentience entirely incomprehensible to human understanding. The eyes persisted as the final testament to a creature that defied categorization, a being whose form could not be grasped, but whose presence was undeniable. Vanishing one by one, the lights left only the oppressive trench darkness and a lingering sense that something had watched far more than anyone could ever comprehend. The Java Deep Sea Whistler. A series of high-pitched whistles, recorded by hydrophones far beneath the Java Trench, resonated through the water. Each note was clear yet impossible to trace to any known marine life, heralding the presence of the Java Deep Sea Whistler. The first recordings sent shivers through the research team. The sound travelled with unusual clarity despite the trench's depth, cutting through the near-freezing water at speeds that suggested it originated from a coherent, sizable source. At over 7,000 metres below the surface, ambient noise is minimal, making the whistles stand out as startling anomalies against the faint hum of distant tectonic activity and occasional crustacean clicks. Observers initially questioned the equipment, but repeated detections from multiple hydrophones confirmed the presence of an unknown acoustic phenomenon. The whistling pulses varied in frequency and rhythm, some rising in sharp arcs before dropping into a steady hum, unlike the calls of whales or deep sea fishes documented in nearby waters. Some sequences resembled the intricate patterns of deep-diving cetaceans, yet the rapid oscillations and irregular harmonics suggested a mechanism entirely different from air-driven vocalization. The notes lingered longer than expected, carrying energy through dense water layers in a way that conventional marine organisms cannot produce. Each burst left subtle ripples in the surrounding medium, perceptible only to sensitive equipment, hinting at a physical presence that was both elusive and immense. Submersibles and ROVs were deployed to triangulate the origin, yet the source remained elusive, as if the sound itself was a phantom moving independently of any physical body. Cameras revealed nothing. Sonar sweeps returned only vague distortions that could have been water density shifts or suspended sediment. The vessel crews noted the disconcerting sensation that the Whistler was aware of their movements, retreating or altering the pattern whenever instruments approached the supposed epicenter. Attempts to follow the acoustic trail often led to empty zones, a ghostly corridor where the water seemed untouched yet the sound persisted. The notes caused subtle vibrations that rippled through sediment layers, prompting minute shifts in benthic organisms that suggested the presence of an unseen massive entity. Polychaetes and small crustaceans occasionally altered their movement, retreating from areas directly above the sound's path. Even the sediment itself seemed to dance in micro-eddies, hinting at the faint but tangible displacement produced by the source. These interactions implied a creature that occupied space without being seen, a presence detected only through its acoustic and environmental influence. Hydrophone arrays captured spectral patterns with irregular harmonics, and researchers noted that the sound's propagation defied expectations for its depth, intensity, and duration. Repetition and subtle variation in the whistles indicated a consistency suggesting an internal structure optimized for sound generation. The frequencies often overlapped, creating interference patterns that puzzled acoustic engineers who could not identify a biological or physical source. It was a signal that both challenged existing knowledge and invited speculation on the Whistler's form and capabilities. The acoustic anomalies were further complicated by the trench's unique layering of water, temperature and pressure, which created a natural channel allowing the whistling to travel vast distances without losing intensity. This phenomenon, known as the SOFAR sound fixing and ranging channel, typically guides whale calls and other marine sounds across thousands of kilometers, yet the Java Deep Sea Whistler's frequencies were unusually high for such propagation, suggesting the creature's calls were precisely tuned to exploit these layers. researchers noted that even slight shifts in thermoclines or salinity altered the travel path, yet the Whistler's notes remained coherent, implying a level of biological adaptation finely attuned to the deep trench environment. Scientists hypothesized that the whistling could originate from specialized air or fluid-filled chambers, vibrating membranes, or unknown resonating tissues capable of producing acoustic energy at extreme pressures. Comparisons were drawn to deep-sea squid and fish that generate sound through swim bladders or modified fins, yet none matched the intensity, clarity, or range recorded. The extreme pressure and near-freezing temperatures of the trench would require extraordinary adaptations, suggesting the organism had evolved a structure and mechanism entirely unlike any previously documented deep-sea life. The intervals of the whistling suggested intentionality, bursts clustered in short sequences, sometimes pausing for minutes before resuming, hinting at an unknown method of navigation, communication, or sensory exploration. At times, the pattern shifted when the ROV lights illuminated the surrounding trench, as though the Whistler could perceive its environment and adapt its acoustic output. The temporal complexity and responsiveness to subtle stimuli suggested intelligence, or at least a highly sophisticated biological feedback system, one designed for a world of darkness where vision alone is nearly useless. When the notes faded, the surrounding trench returned to near-perfect silence, leaving only a sense of a massive, unseen organism that had evaded all attempts at observation. Researchers pored over recordings, spectrograms, and sediment data, yet every attempt to classify, locate, or measure the creature ended in uncertainty. The Java Deep-Sea Whistler remained a spectral presence, defined by what it produced in sound and effect rather than by any visible form, a reminder of the deep ocean's enduring mysteries. As the last echoes disappeared into the deep, the Java Deep-Sea Whistler left only an invisible trail of sound and the haunting certainty that something extraordinary had passed unseen. The Håkon Mosby Plume Beast. A sudden surge of methane gas rising in turbulent plumes above the seafloor of the Håkon Mosby mud volcano was detected by instruments, hinting at the presence of a creature adapted to thrive where toxicity should make life impossible. The Håkon Mosby Plume Beast. The venting columns rose like ghostly pillars through the abyssal darkness, stirring fine clay and mud from the volcano's caldera and casting undulating shadows across microbial mats that carpeted the sediment. Sensors recorded subtle chemical fluctuations, with methane concentrations spiking in localized pockets, accompanied by slight thermal anomalies that could not be explained by vent activity alone. The creature's presence was inferred through these perturbations, a ghostly signature that no visual observation could yet confirm. Through the swirling methane bubbles, glimpses of a semi-transparent gelatinous form appeared, its contours shifting and refracting the scattered ROV lights in ways that obscured the full extent of its body. Sections of its form shimmered faintly as light passed through layers of flexible tissue, occasionally revealing undulating internal membranes or slow-moving currents within its mass. The refractive qualities of its body distorted perspective, making it difficult to judge whether it spanned a few meters or tens of meters across the venting area. Tiny particles caught in its outer edges revealed the movement of currents generated by the creature, subtle yet persistent, like an invisible hand stirring the plume itself. The plume beast drifted with the currents, yet maintained position relative to the vent, sliding through the rising methane columns as though it were in constant negotiation with the flow itself. Microeddies formed around bulges in its body, creating localized turbulence that suggested precise control over its movement despite the semi-fluid consistency of its tissues. At times, portions of its form seemed to anchor momentarily within slower currents, only to stretch forward as if sensing gradients in methane concentration, adjusting with an almost deliberate patience. Its movements were slow and deliberate, contrasting with the chaotic motion of the surrounding venting gas, a demonstration of adaptation to extreme chemical and mechanical stress. The creature's movements appeared to influence, or even coordinate with, the chemical and biological microenvironment, as tiny microbial mats and colonies of tube worms seemed to part or orient toward its passage. Certain microbial colonies increased their metabolic activity in its wake, hinting that the plume beast might be excreting or otherwise influencing local chemical signals. Tube worms occasionally retracted or swayed as their presence approached, indicating sensitivity to subtle pressure or chemical changes. These observations suggest a complex, previously unobserved ecological network, in which the plume beast's behaviour may play a role as a central node in methane-based energy flow. Ghostly illusions were created by sediment stirred by the plumes and refracted light, making it difficult to discern where the creature ended and the methane currents began, confounding every attempt to capture clear footage. Methane bubbles acted as lenses, scattering light in unpredictable arcs, while suspended silt shifted with each pulse of rising gas. Even high-definition cameras could only record partial glimpses, and three-dimensional reconstructions were unreliable due to the refractive distortions. Scientists noted that the creature's partial visibility often coincided with micro-bubbles, rising in spirals, suggesting it may exploit optical effects as a form of camouflage or concealment. Speculation among scientists suggested that it might metabolize methane directly, possess pressure-resistant tissues, or detect chemical gradients through specialized sensory organs, adaptations far beyond the physiology of known deep-sea life. Its potential metabolic pathways could involve symbiotic relationships with methane-oxidizing bacteria embedded in its tissues, similar to known vent tube worms but on a far larger and mobile scale. Its gelatinous form would allow it to withstand pressures exceeding 300 atmospheres, while chemical sensors distributed across its surface might detect minute variations in methane concentration or temperature, enabling precise navigation through turbulent plumes. The plume beast's survival suggested a complex relationship with its environment, hinting at evolutionary pathways that challenge assumptions about the limits of life and the hidden mechanisms sustaining ecosystems under extreme conditions. Observers noted that even fleeting movements altered the distribution of fine sediments and gases, leaving ephemeral patterns that persisted for minutes after it passed. Its very existence raises questions about the evolution of macroscopic organisms in extreme habitats, revealing that life can exploit chemical energy directly rather than relying on photosynthetic food chains, and perhaps even manipulate its surroundings to enhance survival. As the currents shifted, only fragments of its form remained visible, a fleeting impression of substance within the whirling methane and rising sediment, leaving the rest to imagination and chemical traces. Tiny thermal anomalies lingered where its mass had been, and minute changes in microbial distribution marked the path of its drift, evidence of a presence defined more by influence than by substance. Observers were left with a sense of an immense, unseen organism that could not be fully captured or understood by conventional means. When the last shimmer disappeared into the toxic plume, the Hawken Mosby plume beast left only a trail of altered chemistry and the lingering question of what else might endure where biology seems impossible. The Ryukyu Ridge Shadow Net. Fine particles of volcanic sediment swirled unnaturally across the seafloor, forming delicate web-like patterns that stretched over crevices and ridges, hinting at the unseen presence of the Ryukyu Ridge Shadow Net. The sediments appeared to move with a coherence that defied passive currents, twisting over soft mud and around jagged basaltic outcrops in ways that suggested something was shaping the seafloor itself. Sensors detected subtle pressure variations in tandem with these patterns, and faint turbulence rose from the ridge's steep slopes, as if the organism's influence extended beyond what the eye could perceive. The mesh-like distortions bent the scant light of distant hydrothermal vents, creating the illusion of living threads weaving in and out of rocky outcrops and soft mud, each ripple suggesting something deliberate beneath the surface. Shadows lengthened and contracted as venting water refracted along the suspended sediment, producing shapes that resembled lattices or filaments, some fading almost entirely before reappearing in adjacent depressions. Researchers noted that the patterns had no consistent origin point, giving the impression of a vast organism capable of altering its form while remaining largely invisible. Subtle currents carried the suspended filaments along narrow gullies and depressions, while other sections appeared to anchor against protrusions, moving with a rhythm that seemed guided by an unseen intelligence. Sediment clouds formed miniature whirlpools as portions of the net interacted, with rising plumes of hydrothermal gases, creating localized eddies that shifted nearby particles into transient patterns. Observers hypothesized that the creature's filaments might adjust buoyancy or surface tension to hold position or drift across terrain, an adaptation that would allow it to traverse irregular topography without exposing its full structure. Tube worms contracted into their tubes, sponges quivered in place, and tiny crustaceans skittered away as the disturbances passed, leaving the impression of a creature so large that even its indirect influence commanded the seafloor. These benthic responses revealed both the scale and subtlety of the organism's presence. It did not crush or consume indiscriminately, but its movement provoked reaction from the surrounding life, suggesting a carefully tuned ecological interaction. In some areas, microbial mats appeared compressed along faint linear tracks, providing further evidence that the shadow net exerted a pervasive but delicate influence on its habitat. Igniting along the edges of displaced sediment, tiny plumes of bioluminescent bacteria flickered like distant stars as the shadow net moved, revealing patterns of movement that would otherwise remain invisible. The subtle glow traced the mesh-like contours as currents shifted, providing fleeting glimpses of its expansive filaments and their rhythmic pulse. Observers noted that the intensity of bioluminescence often increased where the organism compressed or stretched the sediment, hinting at a complex interaction with the microbial ecosystem that had gone unnoticed in earlier surveys. These ephemeral lights illuminated microscopic trails and eddies, offering a rare and indirect map of the shadow net's influence across the ridge without ever showing its full form. Unpredictable refractions in sediment and the contortion of shadows by shifting currents turned the organism's surroundings into a maze, thwarting every attempt to see it whole. Even high-resolution ROV cameras struggled to maintain focus. Particles acted as lenses, scattering light in ways that produced illusions of separate entities, only to coalesce moments later into a coherent mesh. The more researchers attempted to capture it directly, the more elusive it became, as if its very presence adapted to the limitations of observation, slipping through perception while leaving a silent record behind. In examining the shadow net, scientists speculated it could be composed of modular filaments able to contract and extend independently, or hydrostatic tissues that let it ripple like living fabric across the ridge. Some proposed it might function similarly to colonial invertebrates, where countless units act in unison to create a single adaptive form. Others suggested that subtle chemical or electrical signaling could synchronize movements across its sprawling mesh, enabling coordinated responses to obstacles, currents, or potential prey. Regardless of mechanism, its apparent control over environmental patterns far exceeded any known benthic organism. Environmental traces suggested a rhythm to its movement, a pulse of expansion and contraction that could serve purposes beyond locomotion, perhaps feeding, respiration, or sensing subtle chemical and pressure gradients. Researchers noticed that the net seemed to elongate along depressions where nutrient-rich sediments accumulated, then contract over open rock faces, implying a strategic use of terrain to optimize energy intake or environmental monitoring. These rhythmic pulses were slow but deliberate, producing patterns that resembled breathing or the ebb of a living web, each contraction leaving a faint trail of displaced sediment and shifted microbial communities. Slowing currents and settling sediment left only faint, distorted patterns etched into the seafloor and slight displacements of microbial colonies, leaving their form tantalizingly unresolved. The temporary webs dissolved into the abyssal shadows, leaving gaps where dense mats of sediment once appeared lifted, undulating as if the ridge itself had exhaled. Even sonar sweeps revealed only intermittent reflections, scattered and inconsistent, offering glimpses of filamentary structures too faint or diffuse to fully interpret. Fading from the ridge, the last ripple of the Ryukyu Ridge shadow net left only silent echoes and the haunting possibility that the seafloor itself might be alive. The Puerto Rico Gap Column being. A single towering column rose from the abyssal plain, its forms stretching impossibly toward the faint glimmer of the submersible's lights. The Puerto Rico Gap Column being asserting dominance over every nearby ridge and depression. Its upright presence dwarfed surrounding spires of basalt and scattered sediment mounds, making familiar seafloor topography feel suddenly miniature. Even the strongest currents of the trench seemed to bend around its base, flowing in gentle arcs as though the water itself recognized the weight and rigidity of an organism that defied conventional understanding. The column's sheer height and verticality immediately posed questions about structural support, material composition, and the mechanisms that allowed it to remain rigid in the crushing depths. Its surface shimmered faintly, a strange composite of translucent layers and reflective sheens that caught the dim illumination in ways that suggested a material both organic and alien. Some portions appeared gelatinous, rippling subtly with an unseen rhythm, while others reflected light like polished metal or mineralized tissue. Observers noted occasional changes in coloration where shadows deepened or where the submersible's lights grazed the column's edges, producing optical effects that made sections seem to vanish and reappear. No known deep-sea organism combined translucence, reflective surfaces, and vertical rigidity on this scale, leaving researchers to speculate whether the column's outer layers were protective, sensory, or perhaps involved in a process entirely unknown. Water flowed differently around its immense form, eddies swirling and particulate clouds spiralling upward, hinting at hidden structures or subtle movements within the vertical frame. Fine sediment lifted in slow spirals, tracing the invisible currents generated by the column's presence, and minute pressure changes caused small bubbles or displaced microbial mats to shift along its base. These alterations in water dynamics suggested the possibility of hidden appendages or internal pulsing, though nothing visible extended beyond the column's rigid silhouette. The interaction between the column and the trench currents created patterns that could mislead even the most careful sonar readings, producing echoes that hinted at appendages or filaments that were never confirmed. Crabs clung to nearby outcrops, sponges quivered, and ghostly sea cucumbers drifted away as if acknowledging the column's vast presence, the reaction of small life offering perspective on its unimaginable scale. Tube worms retracted into their tubes, leaving gaps in colonies that had once covered sediment mounds, and bioluminescent plankton briefly flickered as they were swept into gentle eddies at the column's base. These subtle ecological cues painted a picture of an organism whose influence extended well beyond its physical form, commanding not only space, but also the behaviour of surrounding life in ways that suggested immense mass, or a sensory field beyond human comprehension. Even with high-definition cameras and sonar sweeps, the top of the column remained beyond view, obscured by suspended sediment and the distortion of light, as though the creature existed outside conventional measurement. ROV navigation lights cast long, fractured shadows along the seafloor, creating the illusion of multiple structures where only one stood. Attempts to scale its height using sonar profiles produced inconsistent readings, and no sequence of pings or video frames could capture the entirety of its vertical span. Observers were left with partial impressions and indirect evidence, a fragmented portrait that hinted at something far larger than the eye or instruments could fully comprehend. Researchers speculated that its core might contain fibrous or hydrostatic elements, allowing rigidity, or that rhythmic pulses along its surface could serve as feeding or sensory adaptations, though nothing known could explain its proportions. Some theorized that vertical expansion might be a strategy for filtering scarce nutrients from the water column, while others suggested that the column could detect minute pressure changes across the trench. These hypotheses were necessarily tentative, based on indirect observation and environmental influence rather than direct measurement, leaving the creature's inner workings a subject of ongoing and profound mystery. Swaying imperceptibly or rippling along its surface, the column suggested a responsiveness to currents or other organisms, movements so subtle they were almost entirely missed by human observation. These micro-movements caused barely detectable shifts in surrounding sediment and slight eddies that revealed the column's responsiveness without ever exposing the mechanisms behind it. Even the most patient cameras and sensors could only record fragments, leaving a pattern of inference and conjecture that highlighted both the organism's power and its elusiveness. Pulling away, the submersible left only fragmented shadows and lightly disturbed sediment, hinting at the full magnitude of the structure while its vertical enormity and purpose remained unresolved. The trench returned to its usual quiet, the water dark and heavy, while distant plumes of particulate matter continue to drift past, carrying the faint traces of interactions that no human observer could fully catalogue. Each frame of video, each sonar ping served only to reinforce the impossibility of fully understanding an entity that dominated its environment so completely, a form that stretched both upward and outward beyond expectation. The last flicker of light slid down its immense surface, leaving the Puerto Rico gap column being impossibly vertical and silent, a sentinel in darkness that no instrument could ever contain. The Antarctic abyss mirrorback. Temperature probes recorded minute, inexplicable fluctuations along the seafloor, each anomaly coinciding with a position later attributed to the Antarctic abyss mirrorback. These deviations were subtle yet consistent, appearing in locations where sediment and microbial mats behaved unusually, hinting at the presence of a massive organism without a single discernible outline. Researchers pored over the data, noting that the thermal shifts often corresponded with faint pressure variations, creating a pattern that suggested both scale and deliberate placement. In the endless darkness of the abyss, the mirrorback announced itself not with movement or light, but through the subtlest of physical signatures, leaving instruments to narrate its existence where human vision could not. Extracted cores revealed layers compressed in ways that defied natural deposition, suggesting the mirrorback's slow and deliberate passage. Fine-grained mud and icy particles, normally deposited uniformly across the abyssal plain, displayed undulating lines and indentations that seemed to mirror the contours of an invisible vertical mass. These distortions were not easily attributed to tectonic activity or typical benthic life. They implied a form so massive that its weight alone could subtly reshape the seafloor, while remaining almost entirely hidden. Even experienced deep-sea geologists expressed unease at the regularity and coherence of the compression patterns, which defied any known geological explanation. Unusual concentrations of dissolved organic compounds and trace elements hinted at metabolic processes occurring without any visible source, marking invisible paths across the abyssal plain. Samples revealed compounds normally associated with deep-sea respiration and excretion, yet the absence of recognizable organisms in camera footage or sonar scans baffled scientists. The spatial distribution of these chemicals suggested a slow, vertical or semi-stationary organism that interacted with both water and sediment in a controlled manner, releasing materials that sustained microbial life in its immediate vicinity, while leaving more distant regions untouched. These chemical traces were subtle but measurable, offering indirect confirmation of the mirrorback's existence. Sponges remained rigid, brittle stars clustered unusually, and colonies of iceworms displayed altered orientations, their reactions indicating something massive but entirely unseen nearby. These behavioural anomalies offered a rare visual cue for the creature's presence, as fauna that had long thrived in stable, cold Antarctic conditions seemed to respond instinctively to disturbances in their environment. Unlike other deep-sea organisms that flee or burrow in predictable patterns, these species reacted inconsistently, bending or curling only where the mirrorback's influence was strongest, as though acknowledging a presence that could not be observed directly. Even advanced mapping equipment recorded inconsistent contours, producing layers that appeared and vanished without explanation, leaving the mirrorback's structure entirely ambiguous. Sonar reflections shifted strangely as instruments scanned over the suspected area, and high-definition imaging revealed surfaces that refracted or absorbed signals in ways not seen with any known material. No sequence of measurements could reconcile the data into a coherent image. The organism's form existed partially in reality and partially in the distortions it caused, challenging both the precision of technology and the patience of the observing scientists. Proposing a reflective, flexible epidermis and imperceptible movements, scientists suggested these features could account for both the lack of direct visual confirmation and the subtle traces left behind. Some theorized that the mirrorback's outer layers mirrored ice, water and sediment so effectively that even high-powered lights or cameras could not penetrate the illusion. Others suggested that its slow, rhythmic adjustments to its posture might facilitate feeding, respiration, or environmental sensing, but no definitive observations had yet been made. Every hypothesis underscored how extraordinary its survival and adaptation strategies must be to thrive in one of Earth's most extreme environments. Pressure and temperature anomalies, combined with subtle disruptions in microbial mats, suggested the creature might influence its environment in ways that extend beyond simple camouflage, hinting at a functional intelligence or highly specialized adaptation. Sensors recorded microcurrents and particulate shifts in the mirrorback's vicinity, indicating that it interacted with the water column deliberately, either to enhance nutrient acquisition or to maintain invisibility. These indirect signs were the only observable markers of behaviour, forcing scientists to infer movement and purpose from secondary evidence rather than direct sight. As research instruments were withdrawn and sediment settled, only faint traces and chemical signatures remained, evidence of a presence that existed in a form wholly imperceptible to traditional observation. The abyssal plain reverted to apparent normality, the cold, dense water silent, except for the low hum of distant currents. Yet, in the subtle inconsistencies of temperature, pressure, and benthic behaviour, the mirrorback's influence lingered, an enigma written not in visible form but in the invisible fingerprints it left upon its environment. The Antarctic abyss mirrorback left no shape to trace, no shadow to follow, only the quiet reminder that some life in the depths can remain entirely beyond human perception. The Tonga Trench multi-limbed wanderer. Communities of benthic invertebrates were found unusually clustered or scattered, revealing a pattern that implied the Tonga Trench multi-limbed wanderer had passed through, unseen yet profoundly present. Its presence was inferred from the sudden and unexplained rearrangement of organisms that usually adhered to rigid patterns on the trench floor. Even small brittle stars and sea cucumbers, normally slow and methodical in their movements, had shifted positions in ways that suggested a massive and deliberate force had brushed against them, leaving no visible trace of the being responsible. The depth and pressure of the trench offered no solace. Here, at over 10,000 metres below the surface, life operated in extremes, and the wanderer moved within them undetected. Altering their normal grazing paths, tiny amphipods and crustaceans avoided areas where traces of the creature's appendages pressed into the sediment, hinting at predation or environmental dominance. Tracks and depressions left behind in the fine silty mud hinted at the careful placement of limbs that manipulated the terrain without breaking its cohesion. These disturbances were unlike any caused by known species. They lacked the repetitive patterns of a crawling sea cucumber or the erratic scraping of a starfish. Instead, the imprints suggested an intelligence, or at least a complex instinct, capable of rearranging its own body to fit the topography of the abyss while remaining effectively invisible. Layers of the seabed carried minute deposits of organic compounds and enzymatic residues that hinted at feeding activity, forming an invisible map of the wanderer's reach. These biochemical footprints appeared in isolated patches, sometimes clustered, sometimes spread thinly across the trench floor, offering the only tangible evidence of the creature's movements. Researchers studying the sediments noted that these compounds were highly localized, suggesting that each appendage might act independently, processing the environment for nutrients while leaving the rest of the organism undetected. Even the most sophisticated sampling revealed nothing about the creature's total size or shape, only these scattered markers of interaction with its surroundings. Sponges and bivalves appeared to close or retract their filtration structures, responding to disturbances in water flow created by something massive and unpredictable moving overhead. In areas normally teeming with slow-moving filter feeders, the abrupt and synchronized reaction indicated a sudden change in environmental conditions. The organism's movement through the trench could generate subtle currents, enough to trigger protective behavior among stationary fauna. Each retraction and adjustment formed a silent record of the wanderer's passage, captured not on instruments, but in the nervous responses of life forms too small to perceive its entirety. Shallow depressions scattered irregularly across the trench floor revealed appendages of varying lengths and widths, though no continuous form could be discerned, as if the organism folded itself into the terrain. Some impressions were narrow and elongated, others broad and blunt, suggesting a versatility in shape and function that baffled researchers. The wanderer's appendages seemed to merge seamlessly with the soft seabed, only to vanish when the current shifted, leaving fragments of evidence in the form of these fleeting marks. The arrangement of these depressions hinted at deliberate motion, a choreography designed for utility rather than display, further amplifying the mystery of its unseen presence. Colonies of microscopic plankton and larval stages seemed to concentrate near certain depressions while avoiding others, suggesting the wanderer influenced microenvironments on a scale both subtle and vast. These aggregations hinted at indirect interactions, possibly through nutrient release, localized currents, or chemical signaling. observers could only infer that the creature's appendages were capable not only of manipulating the sediment but also of shaping the very conditions for microscopic life. The wanderer's presence, therefore, extended beyond what the eye could see, touching entire ecosystems in ways that remained largely intangible. The arrangement of imprints and chemical residues implied a methodical approach to either detecting prey or harvesting nutrients from the sediment, hinting at intelligence or instinct operating beyond human comprehension. Each cluster of evidence suggested that the wanderer evaluated its environment continuously, adjusting its appendages with precision, probing for food, and possibly avoiding threats. The absence of direct observation did not diminish the implications of these patterns. Rather, it heightened the sense that this was a being of sophisticated adaptation, operating quietly yet profoundly in one of the most extreme habitats on Earth. After the area settled into quiet again, only the traces of disturbed sediment, displaced fauna, and ephemeral chemical gradients remained, an invisible signature of an entity both enormous and elusive. Each mark, each response of the trench's resident organisms, formed a partial narrative of the wanderer's presence, a story told in microcosms and chemical whispers rather than sight or sound. Despite decades of deep-sea research, no submersible or camera could assemble a complete image of the creature. Instead, it left the deep ocean as a living canvas, with hints of a life form that could not be contained by observation or understanding. The Tonga Trench multi-limbed wanderer vanished into the crushing darkness, leaving nothing but the ocean itself to bear witness to its enigmatic passage. The Peru Basin glass eel apparition. In the muted darkness of the Peru Basin, a slender, nearly invisible form glided silently. Its presence hinted only by the faint shimmer of displaced water. Researchers had come to call it the Peru Basin glass eel apparition, though its existence remained largely conjectural, discernible only through fleeting disturbances in the surrounding environment. Unlike the more solid-bodied creatures of the abyss, this eel seemed almost immaterial, its body blending seamlessly with the near-black depths, visible only when it interacted with the smallest particles or the scattered glow of bioluminescent life. Its ethereal movement suggested a mastery of camouflage far beyond the simple transparency seen in other gelatinous species, as though it had evolved to become the very water through which it moved. When tiny bioluminescent plankton drifted past, their glow bent and fractured along the creature's body, outlining a shape that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. These glimmers revealed a length and form that shifted subtly, as if the eel could expand or contract sections of itself at will. Observers noted how the light scattered unpredictably, creating ephemeral patterns on the water's surface that appeared almost intentional. The slightest undulation of its body would refract the plankton's luminescence, giving the impression of a being simultaneously present and absent. In these moments, the eel's presence felt more like a disturbance of the basin's very fabric than the passage of a conventional organism. The eel's transparency created illusions of fragmentation, as though sections of its body dissolved and reappeared elsewhere, making it impossible to determine where it truly began or ended. Video recordings often captured only partial forms, elongated silhouettes that seemed to flicker between discrete segments. Even experienced deep-sea biologists found themselves questioning whether the apparitions represented one organism or many acting in perfect coordination. The patterns were consistent enough to suggest singularity, yet deceptive enough to create a sense of multiplicity, challenging conventional understanding of anatomy and movement at extreme depths. Its elongated, gelatinous form allowed it to withstand the crushing pressures of the abyss, and subtle ridges along its body suggested internal structures adapted to extreme cold and near-complete darkness. These ridges may have reinforced locomotion or sensory function, allowing the eel to move with precision despite its fragile, translucent exterior. Its body appeared almost liquid, yet capable of maintaining coherence over several meters, a combination that hinted at evolutionary solutions unique to the unlit expanses of the Peru Basin. No known abyssal organism combined such extreme flexibility with apparent strength, making the apparition an anomaly even in a region renowned for biological peculiarity. Rather than forceful propulsion, the apparition drifted with undulating motions, altering its curvature to navigate silently through suspended particles and slowly changing currents. Its movement generated subtle disturbances, enough to shift sediment clouds and microplankton, without creating turbulence visible at a larger scale. Unlike most deep-sea eels that rely on bursts of muscular energy to capture prey or evade predators, the glacial apparition seemed to glide effortlessly, relying on minimal energy and perfect attunement to its environment. This method of locomotion suggested an evolutionary emphasis on stealth, a life built on invisibility rather than confrontation. As it passed, clouds of fine sediment shifted and clusters of microfauna responded, revealing the organism's path indirectly, like footprints traced in the water itself. Minute organisms would contract, drift, or scatter, hinting at the eel's presence without ever revealing the creature itself. Scientists observed how the microecosystem adapted in real time, as if the glacial apparition's passage sent ripples of awareness through all surrounding life. Its impact was subtle but undeniable, a quiet reordering of the basin's biological patterns that could only be attributed to a predator or an entity of remarkable subtlety. The slight shimmer along its translucent form hinted at possible feeding zones, suggesting it might absorb nutrients from the water column or snatch tiny bioluminescent prey with almost imperceptible precision. Chemical traces in the water hinted at localized concentration of organic compounds, perhaps excreted during feeding, while physical displacement of plankton created ephemeral trails leading toward the eel's hidden mouth. It seemed to feed without revealing itself, blending predation seamlessly into its passage, leaving no direct evidence of the act aside from small rearrangements in the surrounding microfauna. Moments later, it vanished entirely from view, leaving behind only subtle ripples and displaced particles as evidence of a life that defied ordinary perception. Instruments and cameras could record traces, yet no technology could capture the eel's full form or comprehend the mechanisms by which its body refracted and disappeared. In every recorded instance, it seemed the organism chose to remain unseen, allowing only fragments of its existence to touch human understanding. Each fleeting encounter left more questions than answers, reinforcing the sense of a world largely untouched and unknowable. The Peru Basin glass eel apparition remained a ghost in the depths, visible only through the brief disturbances it left in a world otherwise untouched by human eyes. The Scotia Sea Folding Leviathan. The seafloor of the Scotia Sea undulated in patterns that could not be explained by tectonics or sediment movement alone, hinting at the presence of a vast folding organism beneath the surface. Observers had begun referring to it as the Scotia Sea Folding Leviathan, though direct sightings were rare, and much of its existence was inferred from the slow, deliberate deformations of the abyssal plain. Unlike conventional deep-sea creatures, it moved not through swimming or jet propulsion but by compressing and expanding layers of its enormous, gelatinous body, leaving traces of living folds that could mimic the contours of the seabed. Each apparent ridge or trough suggested not just a shift in terrain, but a massive intentional motion controlled by a being far larger than any other known benthic life. Small brittle stars and sea cucumbers shifted their positions as ridges and depressions formed and flattened, responding to the invisible pressure of something immense moving overhead. The slightest disturbance sent particles drifting through the water and prompted sessile organisms to bend and sway, hinting at the slow but undeniable passage of a creature whose weight and size could reshape the immediate environment. Researchers noted the peculiar precision with which these deformations occurred. Folds appeared and vanished in sequences that suggested controlled, almost deliberate manipulation rather than random motion, as if the Leviathan possessed an innate understanding of the terrain it traversed. Massive and gelatinous, the Leviathan's body seemed capable of compressing and stretching in layers, mimicking the contours of the seabed while remaining unmistakably alive. Sections of its form overlapped in rolling, undulating folds that sometimes resembled submerged hills or elongated ridges. The texture of its gelatinous tissue likely provided both flexibility and resistance, enabling it to endure pressures exceeding 600 atmospheres at depths approaching 6 kilometers. Unlike rigid organisms, the Leviathan could alter its profile subtly, creating illusions of topographical irregularity that confounded the interpretation of submersible footage. Its movement was less a swim than a deliberate folding, each undulation pushing against the sediment to propel the creature across the abyssal plain with slow, deliberate precision. Unlike the rapid, undulating locomotion of known deep-sea eels or cephalopods, this motion produced minimal turbulence, leaving only the faintest sediment clouds in its wake. In some instances, layers of its body compressed to almost merge with the surrounding seafloor, then expanded again, revealing the true scale of its immense living mass. The creature appeared to glide effortlessly, its passage governed by both strength and an intimate understanding of the pressure and flow patterns of its environment. As the Leviathan shifted, it altered local currents, sending faint eddies through the water column that carried tiny particles and organic matter in its wake. These disturbances subtly redistributed nutrients across the seafloor, creating microhabitats in which certain planktonic organisms thrived briefly before settling back into equilibrium. Observers noted the way suspended matter traced invisible arcs, revealing patterns of movement that could not be attributed to ordinary sediment flow, reinforcing the sense of an organism whose scale and subtlety defied conventional classification. Clusters of filter feeders and sessile organisms appeared to reposition themselves subtly, adjusting to nutrient flows and particle movement caused by the Leviathan's passage. The ripple effects extended across several meters of the seabed, and occasionally crabs and small benthic fish responded as though aware of the organism's presence, moving or altering their stance. This indirect interaction painted a picture of the Leviathan not only as a massive solitary being, but also as a force capable of shaping the local ecology without ever revealing its form directly. Even high-definition cameras and submersibles captured only fragmented glimpses as the creature folded and unfolded in ways that blurred the line between organism and terrain. Shadows shifted, ridges appeared and disappeared, and video footage often suggested multiple entities where there was likely only one. The sheer scale and pliability of its body made it almost impossible to determine the creature's true length or volume. Analysts could observe patterns and make inferences, yet every recording left the sense of an immense organism just beyond full comprehension. Eventually, the ridges flattened and the depressions disappeared, leaving the seafloor seemingly untouched yet forever altered in imperceptible ways. All that remained were subtle anomalies in particle distribution and sediment layering, the faint signatures of a living behemoth that had moved silently and deliberately through its domain. Each encounter, brief as it was, emphasized the Leviathan's elusiveness and the difficulty of reconciling such extraordinary movement with known biology and physics. A phantom of immense scale, the Scotia Sea folding Leviathan revealed its presence only through the subtle distortions it left behind in the abyss. The Timor Abyss, luminous filament cloud. The water above the Timor Abyss shifted in imperceptible patterns, currents bending around something unseen as particles wavered like a field of suspended starlight. At first, it was only the faintest anomalies that drew the attention of submersible operators and oceanographers, tiny inconsistencies in sediment movement that hinted at the presence of something vast and extraordinary. Unlike the predictable eddies created by standard abyssal currents, these disturbances appeared almost purposeful, bending and folding in slow arcs that suggested an intelligence, or at least a form of life, far beyond any known deep-sea organism. Observers spoke in hushed tones of an immense, almost spectral entity that seemed to exist more in its influence on the environment than as a solid body, one whose presence could be inferred through the ocean itself. From within these subtle undulations, faint glimmers began to pulse, threads of light tracing arcs that seemed alive yet impossible to define. Bioluminescence in the abyss is often subtle, a brief flicker to lure prey or communicate across short distances, but these faint pulses extended across meters, weaving patterns that suggested coordination at a scale rarely documented. The illumination was not constant. It pulsed in waves, drifting and tapering as if carried by currents, yet maintaining an internal rhythm that hinted at a collective intelligence. It was a living aurora, a shifting field of light that both revealed and concealed itself, leaving observers mesmerized by its elusive choreography. Closer observation revealed thousands of individual filaments, each moving with a slow, synchronized grace, stretching and curling in rhythms that mirrored the surrounding currents. They undulated like fine tendrils of smoke suspended in water, intertwining and separating with a fluidity that seemed impossible for any known organism. Though each strand appeared delicate, Its coordinated motion suggested a shared structural connection or a collective response to environmental stimuli, creating the illusion of a single, vast organism. Researchers speculated that this might be a form of modular life, where each filament functions independently yet contributes to a larger integrated system. Ephemeral patterns formed as tiny plankton and drifting crustaceans altered their course, moved by the passage of the luminous strands, hinting at the immense scale of the presence above them. Observers noted that these microfauna did not merely flee. Many seemed to hover along the edges of the filaments, perhaps feeding on the minute organic matter the strands released. The indirect interaction between the cloud and its surroundings painted a picture of a creature that could influence its environment without ever fully revealing itself, a being defined as much by the behaviour it inspired in other life as by its own form. The strand's glow pulsed in sequences that appeared neither random nor mechanical, forming fleeting geometries that expanded and contracted in ways no known organism had displayed. The rhythm of the illumination was hypnotic, almost musical, and researchers attempted to correlate it with changes in water temperature, pressure, and current flow. No direct correlation emerged. The light appeared internally generated, suggesting a biochemical mechanism that allowed the cloud to communicate, or perhaps to regulate its own structure, without any obvious external triggers. Over tens of meters, the cloud subtly shifted water density and temperature, redistributing nutrients and altering microcurrents in a gentle, almost deliberate fashion. Its presence created pockets of slightly warmer water and areas of concentrated organic material, forming temporary microhabitats for deep-sea microorganisms. These environmental effects were measurable yet transient, disappearing as the cloud moved onward, leaving only faint gradients in the water to hint at where it had passed. Such subtle influence demonstrated the creature's potential to reshape its immediate ecosystem, while remaining almost entirely invisible. The majority of its glowing complexity remained beyond perception, as even the most sensitive cameras and submersible sensors could capture only fragments of its form. Attempts to map the cloud in 3 dimensions were confounded by the constant movement of filaments, the refraction of light in high-pressure water, and the delicate interactions with suspended particles. Each recording left more questions than answers, reinforcing the sense that this was a life form defined less by its physical body and more by the interplay of light, water, and microfaunal activity. The luminous strands drifted apart slowly, dissolving into the surrounding darkness and leaving only faint disturbances in the water to mark where they had passed. The currents eventually erased the last traces of suspended particles and subtle chemical shifts, leaving the abyss calm once more. What remained was a lingering impression of something immense, complex, and alive, a phenomenon that defied conventional classification and demanded a reconsideration of the very definition of an organism. More as a presence felt than a creature seen, the Timor Abyss, luminous filament cloud lingered in memory, an enigma whose full shape may never be known. The Kuril-Kamchatka metallic-skinned lurker. Silver flares appeared across the camera feed, tiny sparks reflecting off particles in the water, as though some unseen force was scattering light with deliberate precision. At first, the submersible operators assumed the flashes were incidental, reflections off suspended sediment or bioluminescent plankton caught in the floodlights. But the irregular patterns resisted explanation. Unlike the predictable shimmer of drifting debris, these flashes shifted in subtle synchrony, moving with a deliberate rhythm that suggested a coherent form. The abyssal darkness surrounding the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench seemed to bend and twist around an unseen presence, one whose existence could only be inferred through the dance of reflected light. It was only after hours of reviewing footage that researchers realized these glimmers were not mere debris, but part of a single, massive organism drifting slowly along the trench floor. In some frames, the flashes appeared to stretch into arcs that suggested limbs or elongated appendages, yet the next angle dissolved them into flat planes of reflected brightness. Scientists initially hesitated to name the entity, concerned that optical illusions in high-pressure water might be deceiving them. As more observations accumulated, however, the consensus formed. The metallic-skinned lurker was real, and it had evaded detection precisely because it manipulated perception. Burnished metal seemed to describe the creature's exterior, catching and bending every faint beam of light into shifting patterns that obscured its true shape. Its skin did not glow like bioluminescent organisms, nor did it absorb light as deep-sea camouflages often do. Instead, it seemed to mirror and scatter the faintest photons, creating a constantly shifting surface that could vanish into surrounding rocks, vents, and sediment clouds. Even submersible lighting appeared distorted. Edges of the creature would blur and fragment, producing illusions of multiple forms where there was only one. The metallic effect suggested a composition unlike any previously documented deep-sea life. Each motion was deliberate, the lurker sliding along rock formations and thermal vent structures while using its reflective skin to dissolve into the surrounding darkness. Observers noted the strange combination of grace and lethargy, as if it measured the movement of each reflective panel against its environment before committing to any displacement. Its pace never seemed hurried, yet the spatial manipulation implied a calculated understanding of the terrain. Unlike faster predators that rely on speed to ambush prey, the lurker appeared to depend entirely on visual deception to navigate and hunt, blending with shadows and creating optical doubles that fooled both cameras and other creatures. Reflected glints created illusions of multiple forms, confusing instruments and small predators alike, making it nearly impossible to distinguish one end from another. Crustaceans and small fish hesitated in its vicinity, mistaking reflections for additional obstacles or potential threats. Even advanced imaging systems were misled. Frames of video would suggest hundreds of fragments floating independently, only to collapse into a singular shifting entity when the camera moved slightly. This effect gave the impression of a being that could fragment itself across space without leaving the water, a trick of perception rather than reality, and yet a skill that allowed the lurker to dominate its shadowed habitat. Scientists debated whether its surface consisted of densely packed reflective cells, mineral deposits, or an unknown keratin-like layer, each possibility hinting at adaptations unmatched in known deep-sea fauna. Mineral accretions on deep-sea creatures are not unheard of. Some shrimp and fish display silica or carbonate-enriched surfaces, but nothing in known biology has achieved this level of optical complexity. A keratin-like adaptation could explain flexibility, while reflective cells might allow it to modulate light direction in response to environmental conditions. Regardless of composition, the skin made direct observation nearly impossible, and its material properties remained a central mystery in understanding the lurker's behavior. Contradicting visual evidence, attempts to measure the lurker with sonar and motion sensors suggested that the creature could subtly manipulate its perceived dimensions or orientation. Sonar pings returned fragmented echoes, sometimes indicating a long, flat structure, other times suggesting compact, rounded forms. In combination with visual reflection, these discrepancies created a persistent puzzle. Observers could not determine its size, its true shape, or even the number of individuals present. Each expedition added more recordings but fewer certainties, reinforcing the sense that the Kuril-Kamchatka metallic-skinned lurker existed partly outside the realm of straightforward measurement. Into a shadowed crevice, the lurker receded gradually as the flashes softened, leaving only faint distortions in sediment and scattered reflections to mark its passage. The trench settled once more into darkness, disturbed only by the subtle rearrangement of particles in the water column. Observers and researchers lingered over every frame of video, every sonar echo, trying to reconcile the illusions with a tangible organism. The lurker's mastery of reflection and concealment had allowed it to vanish from sight, leaving only traces that teased the human eye and confounded instruments. Existing only at the edge of perception, its form might forever remain that of an organism whose mastery of illusion defined the Kuril-Kamchatka metallic-skinned lurker. The Mozambique Channel twin shadow predator. Often misleading even seasoned researchers, the waters of the Mozambique Channel became the corridor in which the creature later called the twin shadow predator was first spoken of. The Channel, a narrow stretch of ocean between Madagascar and mainland Africa, is notorious for its shifting currents and turbulent flow patterns. Observers initially mistook the strange movements reported here for optical illusions or instrument anomalies, yet repeated sightings hinted at something far more deliberate. A predator capable of producing two independent shadows, each moving with eerie autonomy beneath a single light source. Early field reports only deepened the confusion, each describing movements that appeared doubled, yet never aligned with what currents alone could produce. Sonar logs and ROV footage often captured twin silhouettes gliding across the silted seafloor, sometimes separated by several meters, sometimes appearing almost to converge. Conventional explanations, overlapping organisms or refractive distortions, fail to account for the precise synchrony and mirrored timing of the movements, leaving the creature's full nature shrouded in uncertainty. Oceanographers soon realized that the channel's shifting eddies and turbulent retroflexion patterns could not fully account for the repeated pairing seen in the creature's path. The Agulhas current is known for creating vortices capable of affecting drifting objects, yet the twin shadow predator moved deliberately, maintaining a twin-like pattern even when the surrounding water flowed in opposing directions. Hydrodynamic modelling revealed that no passive process could produce the consistent double silhouette, suggesting the effect might be a unique behavioural adaptation. Most accounts focus less on the predator's form than on the strange synchronicity in its movements, as though a second presence mimicked every action from a short distance away. Observers described the sensation of watching not one but two coordinated hunters, a phenomenon that unnerved even experienced submersible pilots. In video recordings, the secondary silhouette often lagged by a fraction of a second, giving the impression of a delayed echo entirely unlike anything documented in deep-sea predatory behaviour. The behaviour of local deep-water species offered the first biological clue, revealing prey animals reacting to attacks from two directions even when only one body was present. Crustaceans and mesopelagic fish displayed startle responses and escape maneuvers consistent with an assault from two separate predators. This suggested that the twin shadow predator's double silhouette was a functional adaptation, exploiting the perceptual vulnerabilities of its prey. Turning toward pressure field dynamics, researchers began modelling the phenomenon after noticing wake signatures splitting in patterns no known creature could generate. Computational fluid dynamics simulations revealed that a body of the predator's estimated size could create vortices reflecting light in ways that produced the illusion of a second body. Yet even the most advanced simulations could not fully replicate the delayed, autonomous movement of the shadow twin. Tracking missions brought little clarity, as tagging equipment repeatedly lost the creature whenever its wake dispersed into two indistinguishable trails. Instruments captured only partial data before being overtaken by the splitting shadow phenomenon. Submersible crews reported disorientation, noting that attempts to follow one silhouette invariably led them into the other, creating the illusion of two separate entities. The only unambiguous sighting came during a brief submersible pass, when observers glimpsed a long, fluid-bodied hunter, followed by a faint counterpart that dissolved when the craft altered its angle. The body itself was elongated and partially translucent, with hints of reflective tissue along the dorsal surface catching the submersible's lights, just enough to create a mirror-like shadow effect. Both shadow and body moved with deliberate fluidity, synchronized yet slightly offset, as if the predator could extend its presence across the surrounding water. Scientific theories remain divided, with some suggesting flow manipulation as an evolutionary tactic and others arguing that no recorded organism should be capable of sustaining such a mirrored signature. Some researchers speculate the predator may have evolved an unknown optical or biophysical adaptation that allows it to exploit ambient light and current simultaneously. Others consider it a product of specialized musculature, an evolutionary novelty in the deepest regions of the channel. What remains certain is that no conventional predator behaves in this manner, and in a region shaped by shifting currents and vanishing boundaries, no mystery unsettles researchers more than a predator whose shadow seems determined to behave like a living twin.